Chapter 5. Go west, young man. This is west, but not west enough. Hitch pauses beside the road. The sign on the road shoulder reads, "You are now leaving Friend, the friendliest little town this side of the Continental Divide." Beyond, U.S. Highway 6 goes straight into an infinity of flat Nebraska grasslands, scoured brown and bare by a relentless icy wind that has blown down from Canada for weeks now. Friend? I would say that, Hitch muses, wondering if it were chance or fate that caused a Harley to break down in such a remote area. He planned to stay on Interstate 80 during much of his trip through Nebraska, but the interstates across Illinois and Iowa had become treacherous, and when he reached Nebraska, he decided to take his chances on Highway 6. Now that there were no more road departments, the interstates were falling into ruin. Storms had washed out earthen berms, which spilled over the 4 lanes in unexpected spillways of dirt and rock. While in other places, the overpasses had collapsed, blocking the road. Worse, the interstates tended to attract human refugees and those who fed on them. Hitch wasn't overly concerned about the people, except a marksman among them who could put a bullet through the nugget of gray matter that remained within his skull. Most of the time, though, people ran from the sight of him. A monster. They call me a monster. Worse than the common dead. But the common dead were something else, because a collision with a zombie at 110 miles per hour could fuck up anybody's day, even somebody who was already dead. Ironically, it was just such a collision that sidelined the Harley just outside the city limits of Friend. Hitch never saw the enormous dead one, frozen to the center stripe of Highway 6, like one of the fat range steers that ran wild across the prairie, until he was on top of him. For a dead one, he still carried a huge amount of body mass. Hitch guessed later the guy had worked at a donut shop, and running into him was like plowing into a brick wall at full throttle. The bike went tumbling, and Hitch didn't know which end was up until he landed 100 feet down the highway, his makeshift splint in bony flinders, and the batteries that kept his joints mobile broken and leaking in the Arctic cold. The sidecar had ripped itself loose and rolled to a stop. The nuclear warhead, wedged between the seat and the floorboard, was undamaged. At least it looked undamaged. He managed to heft the nuke over his shoulder and get the bike upright. He pushed it into Friend, where he laid up at an abandoned post office. And then the cold had overwhelmed him. He became immobilized. He could not move. For weeks, he lay in the recesses of the post office, his body locked up by sub-zero temperatures, putting him at the mercy of anybody or anything that might have come along. But nothing did, and in that time, he listened. For the thoughts of the other they called the Golem, and the visions that might crash into his awareness with the force of a motorcycle colliding with a zombie on a lonely stretch of highway. But they were gone. At first, Hitch believed the physical distance between them had shut down those visions of catastrophe. But as he lay in the post office, questing with his mind for some sense of the Golem's presence, he slowly came to understand that the Golem really had discovered what he sought in Michigan, had gone west to fulfill whatever ambition his monolithic purpose dictated, and had simply closed himself off to the rest of the world. So Hitch was left to wait, until the thermometer thawed and he was able to move. He repaired his splint, using the leg bone of the fat zombie he struck on the highway. He found new batteries and charged them with a portable generator he was able to coax into life. He rigged them into a backpack and restrung the wires that kept warmth flowing to his exposed bones. The bike was a different story. A huge crack split the frame. He had to dismantle parts and slide heavy tubular rods scavenged from the sidecar into the hollow interior, then re-weld the brake. For good measure, he fashioned a steel sleeve and welded it over the brake. The bike wouldn't ride the same as before, but parts were scarce as love in this new world, and if a shred of what Hitch had been in the previous life remained, it was his determination to keep the bike going. He strapped the nuke to the Harley. It didn't occur to him until later that he was driving the world's only nuclear-armed motorcycle. It seemed right somehow that it should be a Harley. And now, all this time later, he pauses at the boundary of the friendliest little city this side of the Continental Divide. The world seemed wider and emptier than he had ever seen it. But I have somewhere to go, he tells himself, and that thought quiets an unheard voice within. Hitch opens up the throttle and roars into the void. Beyond Hastings and Heartland and Minden, the wind is a part of the landscape, inescapable as the horizon, and the brown expanse of prairie to either side, and the wide, white ocean of the sky above. The wind sends curling eddies of grass blades and dirt skirting across the road, where they collect into reef-like shoals that cover the asphalt in places. 100 years from now, the road will be gone entirely, and the grass will grow in an unbroken sea of sameness that will erase any suggestion of interruption. But for now, the road splits the land in halves, and on either side is a void. 2 parts of a growing whole that will wash over the world. If there is time. If the Golem's vision of catastrophe is not realized. Hitch gives the throttle a squeeze and watches the Speedo climb a little higher. He wants answers, and if this Golem has even a whiff of insight, Hitch must get to him before the worst comes to pass. The silence that has descended over the Golem's thoughts hint that time is short. Hitch squeezes the throttle. He rounds a bare bend in the road. On the horizon, he sees an even rarer bump on the landscape. A mountain. No, not a mountain. He draws closer, and the perspective corrects itself. Hitch stops the bike and gets off. Wind swishes across the fields of grass, for all the world sounding like ocean waves murmuring across shallow stretches of sand. He squints into the distance. No, it is not a mountain. It is much closer than that, just over the lip of the horizon. And it is moving. Just barely, but yes, moving. The Golem? Hitch climbs back aboard the Harley, swinging his leg around the protruding cone of the warhead, and fires up the V-twin. Never, during his eavesdropping on the Golem's thoughts, had he gotten an impression of scale. But if this thing crawling across the horizon were indeed that mysterious other, then this trip might go for naught. Because it was big, bigger than anything Hitch could conceive as moving over the land. A hulking and implacable hugeness that suggested the eerie antiquity of ancient temples and arcane gods. Such a thing would not even notice a single man, even a dead man. How soon you forget, he reminds himself, glancing in the rearview mirror. The nose cone of the warhead warps across the corner of the parabolic glass. You have a big stick. A very big stick. The Golem will notice that. He feeds gas to the knucklehead and lets up on the clutch, spraying gravel as the rear tire churns, and the Harley lurches into a high-speed sprint down US 6. The road angles away from the faraway object, but Hitch can see a copse of trees a couple of miles distant. He will stop there and study the thing, and depending on what he discovers, he will plan his next move after that. The trees line a shallow brook that cuts a meandering path through the grass. Hitch cuts the engine and walks the bike into a patch of tall weeds. He tromps across the brook, crushing through a rind of ice that has built up in frosty layers beside the bank, and takes a place behind the bole of a large tree. From here, he has a clear view across the field of the thing moving slowly in the freezing distance. Not a living thing, or dead. It is an effigy, a monstrously gigantic rendering of a being hunkered in a sprinter's crouch that gazes enigmatically into the horizon. It is so tall and so huge that birds orbit above it in the freezing air and perch on its craggy brow. It is shaped roughly like a man, but there all similarities to humankind end. Its features are rough-hewn and vague. Dimples for eye sockets, a protruding bulldog jaw, grossly exaggerated muscles, titanic pistons for legs. It is mounted atop a platform that is carried on a wagon-like affair big as a flight deck on an aircraft carrier. Hundreds of wheels turn grudgingly as the thing is dragged across the field by. Thousands of dead ones, harnessed and chained to a rope as thick as a pipeline. Each is illuminated by a tiny fire that emanates from what looks like a smudge pot held in place by a necklace of chain. They seem to stretch for a mile ahead of the wagon. Hitch can hear them howling and screeching, and the sound reminds him of the zombie hordes descending on the little Hitler's encampment in Amarillo. Hitch cannot imagine what is guiding these feeble dead to pull the wagon, until his gaze travels to the head of the column, where he sees a smaller wagon drawn by two massive bull bison. The wagon is bearing a cage, and the cage is filled with children. Living children. Children. Meat. The zombies are trying to get at the meat. A carrot and stick. At a respectful and safe distance behind this preternatural procession trails a line of people. Many hundreds of human beings. They are carrying box-like objects Hitch can't make out at this distance, but they have them perched against their shoulders with their arms wrapped around the top. He can hear tinny shreds of sounds. Music? A pulsing, metronomic beat that fades and reasserts itself in the chilly air according to the wind. Boom boxes. Stereos. The people appear to be chanting or singing, but the sound is a cacophony, as if each were listening to a different song. He hears a momentary snatch of Bob Seger, a snippet of Public Enemy, warbling blasts of Mozart, and unidentifiable syncopes of reggae. It is a chorus every bit as bizarre as the wailing of the common dead dragging the wagon. The grandeur of this panorama reminds Hitch of something. A memory, perhaps, of something he saw in his former life. An artist rendering of the Sphinx being put together, block by laborious block, by the Pharaoh's army of slaves. A cult, Hitch decides. Unusual, but of no use to him, and only another delay in his journey to Death Valley. He sees himself remounting the Harley and steering a wide path around these people, filing the memory among the other bizarre things he had seen from the day the dead rose up. Another heretic to share the burden, a voice says, and before Hitch can spin himself around, a wire loop slips over his head and clinches tight against his throat. His hand goes reflexively to the meat hook. Watch it! He's... And Hitch swings the hook in a glistening arc that lands with a woody thunk in the chest of a man behind him. Hitch yanks on the chain and hears a tearing sound. He whirls to see the man staring in amazement at the bloom of blood spreading across his layers of t-shirts as the hook emerges from the fabric and rips free. The wire is mounted on a long pole, and the man drops it as his knees fold and he sinks to the ground, still silently exclaiming his surprise. More men are scrambling out of the brush, feinting and thrusting at him with the loops. He brings down another with a vicious blow from the hook, and then the others are on top of him, pinning him to the muddy ground. Hitch feels the electric current from the die-hard battery suddenly vanish. And then he begins to feel nothing. Night. Hitch is bound to a stake, his hands and neck fastened by wire. The stake rises above an enormous pile of cordwood, branches, thatched bundles of dry winter grass, anything that will burn. He cannot move. If the afternoon temperatures were cold, the night has brought on a bitter, early spring freeze, made to seem all the colder by the relatively balmy weather of the day. Again, the batteries sit uselessly in his backpack, the connector knocked loose during his battle with the men. He promises himself that if he is able to extract himself from the situation, he'd weld the damn connector to the battery posts. The legions of zombies have been secured for the night, their pulling cable staked by wickets of steel hammered into the cold ground. Their smudge pots gutter in the wind, and Hitch wonders how much heat the tiny fires could be giving off. Enough to keep the dead mobile so that he might summon them? Their howling and mewling has continued, so at least their mouths are still working. He gazes at the mob of humans gathered around him. They show no sign of being disturbed by the cries of the dead. Looming above all this is the implacable face of the image on the wagon. Hitch does not know what to call it. An icon? A god? It rises so high that it cannot be illuminated in its entirety, and the subtle play of shadow and flickering firelight give it an aspect of grandness that Hitch cannot deny. It appears to be made of huge sheets of plywood, painted a battleship gray. On one nearby panel, you can read letters through the paint. Ernie's Bicycle Shop, Schwinn, Cannondale, Huffy. Workers are scrambling over it and under it, nailing loose panels back into place, greasing axles, repairing cracked wheels. Do they worship this thing, or is it a symbol for something else? Other people are fussing over a podium that has been erected on a small stage. Portable lights rise in a forest behind the podium. Huge banks of speakers and amplifiers flank the stage. On the side of the equipment is stenciled, "Property of the Man with the Band." Hitch vaguely remembers a rock group with that name, but the memory is uncertain, like so many aspects of his former life. Heavy electrical cables snake over the edge of the stage to a row of generators that are bubbling and spewing blue smoke. A music cult. From the darkness, Hitch hears a heavy, amplified tapping. Somebody says, "Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, testing." His voice booms against the plywood monstrosity lurking in the dark. The crowd murmurs expectantly. All of this seems very familiar to Hitch. He remembers the occasional rock concert, and one of his favorites would appear at the convention center about an hour's drive from his hometown. Rush, Don Henley, the Magpies. It was the same as this. The stage preparations, the sound check, and a tense concentration of people galvanized by a growing excitement. Hitch pauses in mid-thought to remind himself. Another memory. Bits and pieces. A single light spears the figure at the podium out of the darkness. He is a young man, fat with layers of t-shirts, flannel shirts, and hooded sweatshirts. He's wearing a sock hat. The crowd surges forward into a compact ring of human bodies and roars, and the zombie horde howls in return, straining at their constraints. "Okay, kids, are you ready?" he screams into the microphone, and the crowd thunders in return, "Yeah!" And Hitch notices for the first time that almost every living person in the throng is probably no older than 25. "Are you ready?" the speaker screams again, this time louder, and the crowd answers with a lusty bellow of approval. "Are you ready?" he booms, and the crowd lets fly with a prolonged roar. All right, the speaker says in a softer voice. "We got a special treat for you kids tonight, just like every night. Every night is a fucking picnic in the Garden of Eden, thanks to our man with the plan, the man with the band, Mr. Heavy G." The crowd drowns out the speaker with a hysterical spasm of screaming, cheering, and applause that goes on for at least a minute, until the man at the speaker is able to quiet them. Heavy G has been off schmoozing with our god, and he's got some heavy shit to share with you, which he'll do with the backup of 9 Inch Nails. The crowd goes crazy again. Hitch can see young men and women shaking their boomboxes like totems as the man at the speaker holds up a compact disc that shoots rainbow spangles of reflected light into the night. The man laughs as the mob begins to chant, "Nails, nails, 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 nails." And he suddenly shouts, "So without any further doo-doo, I give you Mr. Heavy G." The ground seems to shake as the crowd roars and stamps its feet and pushes even closer to the stage. Hitch can see the zombies thrashing against their restraints, trying to get at the humans, mad with the smell of meat. One zombie actually tears his body into splinters of bone and strings of rotten flesh, and falls out of its harness, where it is trampled by other milling zombies. Another becomes wrapped around his smudge pot and goes up in a flaming pyre. A metal staff has worked loose at the far end of the cable as the knot of zombies there strains to loop back and descend on the humans. A tall, muscular black man walks out onto the stage. The crowd's frenzy escalates into something that spirals above hysteria as he raises his arms and simply stands there, soaking up the noise. The man at the speaker backs away with a bow as the black man steps up on a short pedestal and grips the podium on both sides and waits for the tumult to stop. He gazes over the people. His eyes land on Hitch. He watches a moment, then continues scanning the audience until the tumult burbles down to an unnatural silence. He says nothing for a time, and when the silence becomes its own kind of statement, he finally speaks. "It is the prophecy of our God, who was one bad motherfucker," he says. The crowd murmurs, "Nails." "Our God prophesied that a bastard heretic might try to hook up with us one day," the man whispers. The crowd turns and stares at Hitch. "Our God has a name for the heretic. He called him the first of the new ones. According to our God's prophecy, this son of a bitch was going to screw us big time if we let him. Well," he put his hands on his hips and nods defiantly at the audience. "All I gotta say is, fuck that." The crowd cuts loose with a crescendo of noise. "We've been watching for this bastard heretic, this motherfucking new one, because our God told me that if we snuffed this son of a bitch, there wasn't going to be no more of them. And look at what we caught snooping around this afternoon." And he points to Hitch. The crowd turns again and stares balefully. Somebody shouts, "Burn the bastard heretic!" And the man at the microphone holds his hands up, palm out, and shouts, "Whoa, whoa! Now don't y'all be taking the law into your own hands. We gotta do things by the book here, see? That's the way it works. We do things by the book." He clasps the podium again and smiles. "First thing, we gotta give him a chance to repent. And it's obvious that he's one sinning motherfucker. I mean, look at him." The man's face crinkles into a frown of disgust. "All dead and rotten and stuff. But he ain't like those stupid motherfuckers we got chained to the offering. No sir. This motherfucker's smart. He knows exactly what he's doing. And everybody knows there's only two things in this world that's smart. People and our God. So this motherfucker's some kind of bastard heretic, like the prophecy our God lended unto me. Y'all understand?" The crowd screams, "Yeah!" The man nods blankly. "Okay, then. So the book says we gotta give this heretic bastard a chance to see the light. And I can tell y'all right now, he ain't gonna see no light. Not in a million years. It's in his eyes. Can't you see it? The bastard's got no soul. That's why I know he's the heretic bastard our God told me about. He ain't got no soul." "No soul," Hitch recites to himself. "No soul. Is that true? So we're going to go by the book, see?" The man spells it out, enunciating each syllable with hand-chopping strokes. "And when we're done, then we torch the bastard heretic." The crowd shrieks gleefully as the man steps away from the microphone momentarily and offers exaggerated nods to the audience and points to Hitch, mouthing angry, incomprehensible words. The common dead are lowing and bleeding and pulling against their harnesses. A gust of frigid wind brings the stench of their smudge pots blowing through the audience. The man steps back up to the microphone. He glances at the other who had introduced him and whispers into the mic, "Can you lay a tune on me, man?" And an eerie strain of synthesized thudding emanates from the banks of speakers. The man closes his eyes and smiles at the night sky. "Oh yeah, we need to hear the 9-inchers tonight." And then a murmur of "nails" ripples through the crowd. The man holds up his hands. "I will now read from the Book of Nails." All grows silent except for the music. The man extracts a book from beneath his jacket and carefully opens it. This chapter is called Bobby's Story. I'm sure you're all already familiar with Bobby's story. But remember, this is for the benefit of our pal over there, he says, nodding Hitch's way. And then he proceeds to read. The clouds had wept 1,000,000,000 tears, filthy black drops bleeding from bloated, rotting masses, before I spied the crippling spark of tarnished metal, blooded with the darkening red, brittle glitter from within the squalor of the shadow-blasted alleyway. Bankrupt totem, suddenly inarticulate. Its molded prisms vainly sought to maintain the plastic fire of neon starlight. Its intricate garnishes and swooping furls struggled for instinctive emancipation. Struck dumb signal affixed to the timeless breast of a corpse. And I, within my convictions, my marrow logic, simply watched, too awed, too shocked, too stunned to spare the sleet of my tears. See, what Bobby means is, he finds a dead cop in an alleyway, and it's at the end of the world, and the cop is supposed to be keeping law and order. But the world has gone to shit, and Bobby knows he should be afraid, but he doesn't feel anything. Those were the dark dawns, when innocent maternals cannibalized their young in incestuous orgies of feasting. With all the glorious myriad pains, the rites of virtue were flooded with passionate sufferings. When dogs cast the shadows of men, a million hellish voices chorused their approval. Dark dawns and darker days. The sun was set 2,000 times and rise only once, anemic and cautious. The blistering oppressions, so quaint, discarded into flaming pyres that confused the noonday shadows. That's what Bobby had to say about Jesus, the man comments. Hitch tries to wriggle his hands loose from the wire, but his muscles will not respond. They're frozen into place. And all about me, the shrieking confusions, the clicking of dialed prayers, the fractured filaments of some long-forgotten juncture, the intoxicating aroma of decay and impending fermentation, complete, indescribable anarchy set cadence for wandering herds of shepherdless sheep that mewed incoherently, with convictionless love. The man pauses. That's the way Bobby saw the world, full of idolatry and false gods and chaos and shit. Hitch wonders if the heat from the fire will unlock his muscles so that he may free himself, before the fire destroys his body and boils his brain. And if it is free, what then? He is surrounded by people who are bent on his destruction. How will he escape them? Where will he go? What will he do? In a forbidden morning, Heavy G reads on, when things seem peculiarly distinct, there arose an unaccustomed syntax, almost nostalgic, a regimentalized, hushed whispering, a patina of rhythm over the crestless sea of stagnant colors, a subtle solecism of sound breaking the chaotic ranks, established over the proceedings. This is good, the man swallows noisily. This is getting to the good part. And each of us is interrupted from our individual reveries of solipsistic stupor by that fragile heartbeat, load the incomprehensible, or bleeding our glee. Man, this is too cool, the man says hoarsely. Our God is coming. That's what Bobby's saying. And the crowd whispers in unison, nails. Hitch sends a tendril of thought snaking out across the horde of dead ones harnessed to the towing cable. He tells the ones at the end to pull against the stake. They begin to rise and stagger in a stiff shamble to the spot where the metal wicket has been hammered into the ground. The hissed murmurs took on a new momentum, collaborating to spawn a subdued miasma of babbles, seething, roiling, expanding and collapsing and fissioning, until the babble intensified to a rumbling, thunderous roar of voices, swaying sinuously, pulsing metronomically, subduing the land with heretical zeal. The prophets of what had been cried out, and were caught up in the blasphemy of that movement. The man halts and mops sweat from his forehead. Hitch can see all the zombies, working together, starting to uproot the stakes. Some have already done that and are simply standing there, awaiting further orders. And when the known world has committed its all, the throbbing ascending to a shrieking crescendo of sound, muscle, and evacuated emotions, the man gasps for effect, and imploded into a discord of muted howls of terror as the sinister agent of that odious incantation coalesced before all men upon the night-ridden skies. The man shouts, "Our God has arrived!" as the microphone squalls feedback. The crowd chanting, "Nails! Nails! Nails!" The man lets them go on a moment. Hitch sees that the cable is free. The man starts to read again. Shards of emotion, splinters of revulsion, horror, disgust, and delight, spreading concentrically, as some invisible shockwave, defining that loathsome apparition crowned in scintillating spines. There were those, subtracted from dignity, who bowed and paid reverence, and there were those who serenely scorned. But history has foretold, and the prophecy was self-fulfilling, and there were those who pronounced its name. Nails. The crowd roars its name and shakes their boomboxes to the night sky as the man at the microphone closes his eyes reverently and appears to pray. Hitch forms a mental image of the zombie legions chained to the cable, stretching in a straight line, extending away from the wagon. Then he bends that line, starting at the tip, into a comma-shaped configuration. The zombies at the end of the line begin to move. No smirking Buddha, no tempestuous Titan, no corrupting Beelzebub, no forgiving Nazarene, merely a simple efficiency of refined purpose. Who can describe its arrival, the orderly chaos that advanced away from it? The days, the months, the year that followed were nearly without words. The simple folk begged to, or not to, feel the ragged agony of its peculiar love, the sharp, sweet pain of its embrace, as they were hammered into place with sparkling spikes. They wept their shame. Those of us who were left unmoved, untouched, fled, jeering and cackling, until that almighty shaft swept down from the lights to impale us with enlightenment. The man sighs into the mic, a gust of sound blowing across the audience. He says hoarsely, "Bobby's conversion is about to come." The crowd burbles in response. Hitch sees dead ones moving in a semicircle, their smudge pots a string of firefly flickers in the dark. And as I writhe beneath my snakeskin of disgrace, that simple god went about his simple work, untroubled, unhurried, nailing things, fastening them securely, stapling butterflies to blossoms, and the tides to their bays, thumbtacking clouds to their airy berths, bolting the wind to its proper ways, and all such matters. The walls were down, the lamps rekindled. New synapses for rusty emotions stamped upon my board. I felt a budding enhancement, almost to love. The man smiles at the people below. "Things are as they were," he reads. Or, rather, as they should have been. The sun arrives and descends with reassuring regularity. The waves advance and spill back at their correct intervals. People are born and live their lives, and die and are born again. The scars are healing. The world is nurtured in soothing rhythms. The semicircle is nearly complete. And ever so often, we feel it necessary to repay, through small, regular installments of devotion, the debt we owe. We return to the house of our Father, the Temple of Nails. And we are in love. We are in love. We are in love. Love. The people breathe out a satisfied sigh and watch the speaker, who turns to Hitch. He closes the book and stares, offering an expression of deep concern. He shakes his head. "Now tell me, you bastard heretic, has Bobby's story brought you onto the path of enlightenment? Do you now love our God, who is one bad motherfucker? Do you love our God's people? Do you love?" Hitch answers, "I'd love to rip your throat out." A snarl runs through the audience as the man holds a weary hand aloft and whispers, "Didn't I tell y'all? Didn't I? Not in a million years would this bastard heretic see the light. And there's your proof. His smile darkens and hardens. His gaze drills into Hitch's eyes. He says, "Burn him." "Burn him!" the crowd shouts, and the teenager peels off his Metallica t-shirt and fires it up with a butane lighter. "Here, you bastard heretic," he spits at Hitch. "Eat this!" And he hurls the flaming shirt into the pile of wood. The stack roars to life, flames wickering through the bundles of dried grass to kindle the branches and cordwood. In less than a minute, a good-sized fire has taken hold and is drawing closer to the stake. Hitch concentrates on a single word. Come. And there you go. Y'all see that? The man at the mic shouts over the chanting, screeching mob. That's what our God does to heretics. Y'all keep that in mind if some other asshole with no soul comes snooping around. The fire is eating through the wood and gaining a life of its own, air rushing into the conflagration to stoke the flames. Blasts of heat rush over Hitch, and he can feel mobility returning to his joints. He twists his wrists and feels the wire slipping. "Burn, baby, burn," the voice booms over the speakers. That's right. It's a goddamn disco inferno. Hitch gazes through the twisting whirls of heat and smoke. He sees a line of guttering lights, out in the dark, advancing on the stage from all directions. "Come to me," he beckons, and they continue to move forward. He pushes with his foot against a wedge of cordwood and snaps the wire binding his feet. The stake is loose, and if need be, he could escape the fire. But not yet. "Our God is nails," the black man shouts, and the crowd answers with a sudden chant. "Nails, nails, nails." And the man continues, "Our God does not like to be fucked with. Not by bastard heretics or anybody else." Hitch stares beyond the people to the 1,000 of dead ones closing in on them. They circle the mob, dragging their cable with them, the god figure capping off the enclosure. Now, the bearers of God formed a solid wall of hungry, dead flesh, and their feast was trapped within. Let your God save you now, metalheads. Hitch hears a chorus of screams erupting along the periphery of the crowd as somebody finally notices what is happening. The black man is spewing taunts from the microphone, but then he too turns and sees the advancing dead ones. His eyes go wide, a wet shine of terror glistening in the light of the stage setup. He says in a shocked squeal, "God damn!" Then everybody is running and screaming as the dead enter the perimeter of light. A scattering of gunshots erupts from the throng. The dead ones stumble and fall. A bank of speakers topples from the stage and erupts in a shower of sparks and feedback that sends eerie electronic screams whistling into the night. The black man sputters into the microphone, but cannot find any words to say. His helper rushes over and tries to drag him away. Hitch breaks his hold on the dead ones and struggles to undo the remaining bits of wire binding his hands. The dead are so close now that their hunger alone would continue to drive them forward. Already, Hitch can see them bringing down and feeding on some of the people. A basket of bones tears a ragged chunk of flesh from a teenage boy's thigh, chews, and then swallows it, where it plops to the ground, falling from the thing's non-existent stomach. A group of living people sprints for the god figure on the wagon and begins scrambling onto its massive flanks. The man on stage sees them and screams into the microphone, "Hey, you bastards! You defilers! Get the hell off God!" He shoves the assistant out of his way and stalks to the side of the stage, where he unlatches a packing trunk and flips the top open. Then he yanks out an AK and slams a clip into place. He aims the gun and sprays a chattering burst that empties the clip. Several of the people go down screaming, while the others press on, oblivious to the gunfire. He yanks a bandolier of clips from the trunk. Hitch tries to tear out the wire. The fire is licking at his boots now, and his leather chaps have begun to give off smoke. He can't get the binding to loosen, so he kneels and yanks the entire stake out of the woodpile. The wood settles unexpectedly, and Hitch nearly topples to the pyre. A great gust of sparks flies out and sails into the madness surrounding the stage. Hitch regains his balance and frees the stake. He crouches again and leaps from the fire. People swirl by him. A group of older men make like they're going to recapture him, and he uses the stake to batter at them. The grounded end of the stake had begun to burn, and when it strikes the men, showers of firefly sparks sail into the grass. The fabric cover on a speaker begins to smoke, then bursts into sudden flame. Heavy G looks around himself uncertainly. His assistant tugs at his arm, and Heavy abruptly backhands him and stalks to the rear, where he goes down a flight of portable stairs. The dead one tries to grab him, and he blows the top of its head off with a casual shot. Hitch slides the stake from between his back and his wrists, and steps through the circle of his arms, so that his hands are now at the front of his body, where they belong. He untwists the loops of wire. They fall away, steaming in the grass. Most of the people have retreated to the wagon, where they are surrounded by the common dead. The zombies have slowed their advance, and Hitch wonders if they are savoring the impending feast. The black man has climbed onto the god figure, and somehow he has made it to the very top of the figure's cliff-like brow, where he sits, his feet dangling over the edge, the gun muzzle twinkling as he picks off panic-stricken people trying to climb to safety. "Yo, down there!" he shouts over the din. "Y'all keep your asses off our god, you hear? I'm the prophet. I'm in charge of who gets to ride God. And I say, keep your asses off until I say you come up. Hear?" And he fires another shot. The people are pressed against the sides of the wagon. Some are sliding beneath the huge platform and crawling on their bellies for the other side. Others are on their knees, frantically whispering, "Nails, nails, nails." A bullet smacks the ground at Hitch's feet. He jerks his gaze skyward and sees the black man sighting him down the AK's barrel. "Yo, bastard heretic," he shouts. "I guess you think you're something else, don't you, motherfucker? I guess you think you're something pretty damn special. What with all this shit you done?" He waves his hand indifferently. "Oh, I know it's you. It was you made these dead motherfuckers turn on us. You're different. You ain't like them. You're a thinking man, zombie. I don't know how you did it, but I know it was you. But it ain't gonna do you no good." He pats the massive brow of the figure. "We got enough of the divine ammo up here to stop an army. Not that it's gonna come to that." He cackles and fires another shot in Hitch's direction. Hitch orders the dead ones to stop. "Yeah, man. Our God told me someone like you might be passing through." On his way west. The god they call Nails. "He told me a lot of things, man." The Golem. "He told me to burn heretics like you. Burn all the heretics. Clear the land of disbelievers, so the prophecy can come true." Hitch shouts up at him. "What prophecy?" The man throws back his head and brays. "Oh, man, a new world is coming. A whole new world, brought to you by our God. who was one bad motherfucker. The smudge pots dangling from the dead ones' necks are beginning to flicker out. Some dead ones have already fallen into icy rigidity. The mob of people at the base of the carrier are starting to pick off the moving dead ones. "Now see," the man shouts to his people below him, a paternal lilt to his voice. "See there? Y'all didn't have nothing to worry about. Those damn pots weren't going to burn all night. They never burn all night. That's why we got our winter devotions, see? Of filling the pots with oil every morning. So the bearers can move. So the bearers can take our God to his home in the desert. But the bearers are popsicles now. And it's the faithful among you who remain. The believers. See, I figured this was a test. Some kind of a test by our God, who was one bad motherfucker, to weed out the disbelievers. And he sure as hell done that," the man booms. The people shout, "Nails!" "Damn straight," the man answers. His gaze swivels back to Hitch. "You're screwed, man. Your friends have gone hostile bye-bye. My people are about to toss your dead ass back into the fire." "Hate to say it," he giggles, "but it's lights out for the bastard heretic." Hitch casts about for a weapon as the people move slowly away from the carrier and begin threading their way through the ranks of frozen dead ones. He feels the cold settling into his bones as the blaze eats up the remaining wood, and he moves closer to the flaming pile. If he could find where they're taking his battery rig and get the connector reattached, he could escape into the night. But he doubts these people will stand by and do nothing as he searches for his things. He snatches up the stake he'd been wired to. The end is blackened and smoldering, but the fire has gone out. "I needed to warm things up around here." But he sees nothing he can burn. Holy ammo. One of the teens killed by the zombies, an enormously overweight boy of about 16, is struggling to get back on its feet. Hitch punches through its skull, destroying its brain, then works the end of the stake into the folds of fat, ringing its midsection. Huge gobbets of fat grease the pole. Hitch wraps the kid's tattered shirt around the end. He dips the tip into the guttering pyre. The stake bursts into flame, dripping smoky blobs of fire. Excuse me," the man shouts from the top of the Godhead. "Would somebody please kill the bastard heretic? Is that asking too much?" Hitch hefts the stake like a javelin. The people stop their advance and watch stupidly. "Yo! Y'all!" the man bellows down at them. "Kill the motherfucker!" Hitch hurls the stake. It cuts a flaming arc across the night sky and smashes through the plywood eye of the hulking, crouched figure. Almost immediately, flames begin to spout from the hole. Hitch can hear the man sputter, "Oh shit," and sees him scramble and half fall down the figure's neck. The people resume their advance. Hitch reaches reflexively for the meat hook, and to his surprise, finds that it's still there. A tongue of flame is shooting out of the god image's eye. Some of the people look up and see what is happening, and scream. A muffled pop. 2 pops. Night becomes day. No sound for an instant. Then, air is sucked into the god, and a gargantuan explosion spews it all forth in a blinding fireball and shockwave that knocks everything flat and causes the ground itself to jump up. Wood, fire, dead ones, soon-to-be dead ones, the stage, the amps and speakers, everything is simply blown away as the god figure's skull splits open and sends a billowing mushroom cloud of superheated gases into the frozen Nebraska night. The thing begins to burn. Hitch struggles to his feet, brushing blackened and steaming body parts from his leather jacket. He wipes a coating of grime from the remaining lens of his Ray-Bans. The entire carrier is aflame, and the light of that fire illuminates the land for miles around. Other figures are moving amidst the settling rubble. They are all dead. He figures God will burn for days. Long enough for him to find his batteries and get the hell away from this place. Daylight. A Canadian Arctic front has cleaned the sky and brought a new draft of frozen air. But Hitch does not feel it as he whistles down the US 6 straightaway for points west. He has brand new batteries in his backpack. Batteries he picked up in a little town called Funk, miles beyond the site where the Nails God figure burned. And this time, he bolted and locked the connector into place. It would be a bitch if he needed to replace them, but by then he hoped to be well south of the cold weather, bound for a warmer climate. Much warmer. As he rides, he thinks of everything that has happened. The battle for the little Hitler's ray machine, the skirmish in Michigan, and the run-in of those who he is sure were acolytes of the Golem. If he were a believer in destiny, events seem to vindicate his decision to seek out this other, despite its evil. He seems fated to go west. Hitch sees a lone figure stumbling down the highway. It is a black man. Hitch slows. The man's clothes are charred. He turns uncertainly at the sound of the bike and sticks out his thumb. Hitch rolls to a stop beside him. It's the man from the stage, Heavy G. He is wearing sunglasses. He doesn't seem to recognize Hitch. "I need a ride, man," he says. "I ran into some shit down the road. Can you give me a lift?" Hitch reaches and removes the man's sunglasses. His eyes are totally yellow. They've been boiled in the sockets. "Yeah, that's right. I'm blind," he said. "But that means I'm safe, right? A man who can't see can't hurt you, right? So how about a lift?" Hitch puts the sunglasses back in place. "Would you ride with a heretic?" The man's jaw drops. He stands there a moment, then takes a step back. "I didn't think you would." Hitch fires up the Harley. He fingers the meat hook thoughtfully, then lets it fall back by his side. Perhaps this man's God would be merciful. "He's gonna kill you," the man shouts as Hitch pulls away. "Kill your dead ass." And as Hitch glances one last time in the rearview mirror, he sees the man dancing crazily on the cold asphalt. "I'm already dead," Hitch says to himself. Dead, but not down. The wind howls across the prairie. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. One way to leave Las Vegas is on Highway 95, which curves north over the Toyabee National Forest, and then respectfully south around the Nevada Test Range, where nuclear bombs were once set off like Black Cat firecrackers at a 4th of July picnic. The road takes a northwesterly bend at the town of Amargosa Valley. From there, the smart money would have you stay on US 95, which parallels the California border for a good distance. From US 95, north of Amargosa Valley, a multitude of friendlier roads cross into California. But the smart money pulled out of Vegas a long time ago. At Amargosa Valley, a single road leads south. State Road 373. It splits into two lesser roads, 190 and 127, just north of the baked hills of the Greenwater Range. At that point, The ride becomes long and miserable to just about anywhere, but some places are worse than others. A place just west of the Amargosa Range, Death Valley. It is the deepest and hottest place in the Western Hemisphere, 282 feet below sea level. Afternoon temperatures that climb into the 120s, 2 inches of rain per year, a surface comprised of salt fields, borax, gypsum, soda, and table salt. Death Valley was and remains a test. It tested the gold miners who came years before to dig out its riches, and the borax miners who followed, and finally, the tourists who came to experience its peculiar geography and climate. It tested the people in the shriveled towns along its barren flanks, who clung to their grim lives like the surrounding thicket of mesquite, until the relentless heat finally killed them or drove them away. It tested every living thing until the dead rose up. And then it tested nobody, because hell had spread to every corner of the world, and the place of death no longer held any fascination for the living. Death Valley remained empty until the golem arrived. And then Hitch. When that happened, the new test would begin. Hitch stands beside the highway and stares at the singing zombie nailed to its X-shaped crucifix. The road meanders around the hills in a looping, serpentine track, like a gigantic reptile lying dead in the blazing afternoon. Heat waves undulate above the soft asphalt and rise invisibly into a sky the color of sulfur. The land seems ready to explode. Yea, as I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear evil, for thou art a deceit, the dead one sings, its voice a dry screech. The words seem to evaporate into the thin, superheated air. Hitch steps closer and gazes up, shielding his one eye from the sun. The dead one's desiccated skin is stretched tightly over its bones like tan leather. A gaping hole pierces its torso, as if it had taken a point-blank shot from a howitzer. I am he that liveth and was dead, and, behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death, it sings in a hoarse rattle. The crucifix is about 20 feet high and consists of rough posts of creosote-treated lumber crudely bound at the middle by what appears to be lengths of human tendon. And in these days, the thing caws, shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from thee. Hitch takes off his Ray-Bans and wipes the remaining lens. It is crusted with the baked remains of grasshopper and ladybug and beetle, as is the Harley that stands at the edge of the road. The hand grips are coated with flecks of cooked flesh. He has driven 14 days and nights to get here, a trip that began in Michigan last winter and ended, temporarily, in Nebraska as he cannibalized a sidecar to repair a cracked frame. And then there had been the business with Heavy G and the godlikeness. The black man had told him he had no soul, and that the golem, whom he called Nails, would kill him. We'll see. He'd taken a long out-of-the-way detour to find this place, driving through Colorado and down into New Mexico and Arizona, then up through Nevada. The roads in western Colorado had been cut off by rock slides, and in other places, the interstate had fallen or was blocked by marauding bands of living people. So he'd taken the long way, careful to guard his prize, recovered from the little Hitler. Effective yield 50 kilotons, he recites to himself, like a proud father bragging on his newborn son's birth weight. And now he is here, finally, and it stopped at this first sign that anything but dust roamed these parts. A dead one nailed to a crucifix, reciting biblical prophecies of doom. A warning. The golem, it seemed, would not be sharing any of its secrets. And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death. It's quoting from the book of Revelations, Hitch thinks, and just as quickly asks himself, when was the last time I attended church? He could barely remember a stint at Vacation Bible School as a kid. And before the throne there was a sea of glass, like unto crystal. And in the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were 4 beasts full of eyes, before and behind. Hitch gazes up at the thing on the cross. It is not of the thinking dead. He can sense no mind beyond its aching obsession to consume living flesh. But somehow it is being made to speak. The kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth upon the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. The great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Hitch can make out an object planted in the jabbering thing's skull, midway down the forehead. It reminds him of a Hindu caste mark. He takes the meat hook and swings it in a widening parabola, then lets it fly on the upswing so that it sails over one of the timbers and wraps tightly around the wood. He yanks on the chain until the crucifix begins to totter. The thing nailed there utters a gritty wail as the crucifix begins to lean, and then falls to the earth with a dusty whoomp. The thing's head pops off and rolls to Hitch's foot, and stops there, rocking in the sand. It stares up at him, its lizard-like eyes unblinking, and says, The name of the star is called Wormwood. Hitch wedges a yellowed fingernail beneath the object in the thing's forehead, and tries to pry it loose. It will not move. He lifts the head and holds it before him, staring into the dead eyes. More to himself, he asks aloud, What the hell are you? Let me alone, the thing replies, that I may take comfort a little, before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and shadow of death. And at that moment, a shadow sweeps over the ground, blocking the ferocious pressure of the afternoon sunlight, as something gigantic hurls out of the sky and dives screaming toward Hitch. A reason to be. I came to this place for answers. But what if there are no answers? Hitch throws himself into the dirt as something whooshes barely inches above his skull and is gone. A shockwave of displaced air stirring up cyclones of dust in its wake. He hears a scream unlike any scream he can remember and looks up. He does not understand what he is seeing. Is that a bird? It is sailing into the distance, turning for another attack. And Hitch's instincts tell him to sprint for the Harley and run. Because the thing is big. As big as the jetliner that crashed into the Ohio Turnpike. A multitude of other impressions crowd his mind all at once. Its featherless wings stretch wider than any jetliners, and resemble fleshy membranes anchored between slender bones. A bat's wing. Or a pterosaur, he realizes. A mental picture of a book about dinosaurs forming and then vanishing. A long, bony tail tipped with a stinger pendulums behind the thing as it wheels in the roasting air. Hitch scrabbles in the sand to free his hook from the crucifix as the bodiless dead one shrieks damnations. The thing in the sky has turned and is diving toward them again, and as Hitch dashes toward the motorcycle, he dares to look over his shoulder. Impossible. The thing has multiple heads, each terminating on an impossibly long, tapered neck. One, a powerful set of jaws that looks as if they might crack through solid stone. Another made of eyeball clusters, and others that are ringed with prehensile feelers festooned with thorns. As it barrels in on Hitch, it reaches out with muscular hind legs and spreads huge talons to snatch him out of the sand. Hitch hits the dirt by the Harley as the monstrosity roars overhead, one claw raking the sand just to his left and throwing up clouds of dirt. As it sails past and gains altitude for another dive, Hitch clambers aboard the bike and kickstarts the V-twin. Get to the hills, he tells himself. If I can make the hills, it won't have a clear shot at me. He pats the warhead and feels that it is securely lashed to the bike, then guns the throttle. The bike fishtails until the rear tire grabs the pavement, and he's accelerating down the empty road as a shadow flashed over him, and the sky is covered by a tent of yellowed flesh. He kicks the bike into high gear and hunkers down as the speedometer climbs to over 100. The bird is off to his right now, turning in the sky, its gargantuan wings flapping powerfully as it pirouettes for another run. Hitch can see it angling for an intercept down road, and at the last second, he jams on the brakes as the creature rockets by, missing him again by only a few feet. Whatever it is, it knows what it's doing, he thinks, and as he measures the distance to the first outcropping of wind-scoured rock that might offer refuge, he realizes he wouldn't make it. The giant claw slams into him, snatching him off the bike. He is airborne, sailing soundlessly, and the world takes on the surreal overtones of a dream as he watches the bike tumble out of control behind him, and then grow smaller as they rise higher into the scorching, shimmering desert air. He grabs one of the talons wrapped around his torso and tries to bend it away from his body, but his grip is too powerful, the claw anchored deeply between his rib bones. Nor can he budge the other two. Though he does not feel pain, he can tell by the tension of his bones rubbing together that the thing is squeezing him, and at any moment his body might fly apart like a piñata. He tries to free the meat hook, but there is no room. It swings uselessly at the side of his leg. Something tumbles out of his jacket sleeve, clings to the whitened bone of his forearm for a moment, and then is snatched away by the wind. A dead tarantula. No, not me. I did not come to this place to die again. He tries again to jam his fist between his body and the creature's unrelenting grip. This time he succeeds in touching the chain. He curls an index finger around the first link and begins slowly to raise the hook, link by precious link. The tip snags on his leather chaps, but he finagles it loose. One of his rib bones snaps. The thing's grip is tightening. An eyeball atop a long stalk droops down and watches him as he raises the shaft of the hook to his palm and wiggles it free. Now we'll see what you're made of, he whispers, and hurls the meat hook into the thing's stomach. It sinks with a hollow thunk. Hitch hauls on the chain, tearing a ragged trail of destroyed flesh down the creature's midsection. The creature flies on. Flaps of flesh rip loose, and Hitch sees a peculiar pattern emerging from the destruction. The patches are square in shape and appear to have been sewn together with bits of sinew. What is this? He stares down at the claws gripping him and sees they are an amalgam of bone cemented with a hardened, cartilaginous substance. The joints are pinned together with finely honed pegs of bone that have a machined look to them. What is this? The flesh, the ligaments, the bone. The creature's body appears to have been manufactured from parts of dead human beings. As Hitch recovers the meat hook and tears the thing's underside, he sees through rents in his flesh that there are no internal organs at all. That it is merely a framework of bone, muscle, and surrounding ligaments and tendons, ingeniously constructed from thousands of smaller parts, all of which seem to have been scavenged from the living dead. Then how does it think? More eyes descend on stalks to watch Hitch. Then the entire cluster bends down. At the center of the writhing, staring mass, he can see a small glint of red, similar to the jewel-like object fastened to the skull of the crucified dead one. They're being controlled through that thing somehow. But what is it? Something flashes by, a glitter of silver, and the familiar roar of an internal combustion engine. The eye stalks snap into hidden recesses, and the cluster jerks forward, while the other clusters raise themselves into a kind of rigid, defensive stance. Their movement opens the view, so that Hitch is suddenly given a vertiginous perspective of the hills and dry valleys wheeling below them. He hears the heavy clatter of automatic weapons, and then an airplane streaks by. Not a jet, but a propeller-driven warplane he remembers from the pages of a book about World War II. Mustang. That's a P-51. And this time the memory is sharp and clean of himself as a little boy sitting at his work desk in his bedroom. A book about the air war in Europe open beside him. A now empty Revell model box off to the other side. A plastic model of a P-51D in front of him, smelling of liquid glue and paint, as he tried to duplicate the D-Day invasion markings of a photo in the book. The memory of that day arouses the memory of a feeling in him, something other than fear or loss. He wonders if it is happiness. Another Mustang screams past. Hitch can see the pilot, a human pilot, ogling him. Then swarms of Mustangs are swirling around them, blazing away at the creature with their .50 calibers. The bird utters a chilling wail that superimposes itself over the rumbling Rolls-Royce Merlins, and lets fly with a volley of thorns that barely miss a passing fighter. Bullets whicker through the creature, but it isn't until a volley of tracers rips through its wings and kindles a fire that Hitch dares to believe the thing might have a weakness. Its wing begins to smoke, and the flesh curls into black fly ash that disappears in the slipstream. The creature lurches in midair and then dives for the ground at an almost vertical angle. Hitch pries at the claw with his hook, dislodging segments of bone and cartilage in ragged chunks. Its grip loosens. The ground spins toward them. Hitch can see patterns of bullets blasting holes in the earth ahead as the Mustangs dive in pursuit. He hammers at the claw, tearing out larger pieces. The claw shatters. The creature tries to pull out of its dive, and Hitch drops away, sailing almost parallel to the ground for a moment. He rolls himself into a ball and waits. The ground slams into him, and he can form no other thought but to keep himself tightly wrapped. That if his arms or legs flap loose, he would break bones or lose a limb altogether. He bounces and rolls and strikes something so hard it seems to pulverize his body. And then he is simply rolling. The rolling slows, then stops. He lies there for a moment, trying to sense if major damage has been done. He opens his eyes. The sky burns hotly. He sits up. His arms are okay. His legs are where they should be. Even his Ray-Bans are still hooked into place. He stands and shakes himself. The chain attached to the meat hook rattles. Dead tarantulas fall to the caustic sand. I can live with this, he thinks. In the distance, he spots the bird thing, trailing fire and a smear of oily black smoke, plunging into a rock face and dissolving into a cloud of flinders. A pair of Mustangs bank sharply and climb into the yellow sky. Hitch offers them a nod, then gazes at the empty land, trying to decide which direction leads back to the motorcycle. He reconstructs a mental image of the road map, and by roughly calculating the angle of the sun, he begins to trudge northwesterly. This is going to be a long walk. He hears a faint roar growing louder. Ahead, he sees a distant object resolve itself into one of the Mustangs, flying very low, coming straight at him. The pilot is banking his wings. It flashes mere feet overhead, and then rockets into the sky behind him, its wings heliographing the afternoon sunlight. Same to you, whoever you are, Hitch says aloud, and wonders if he really means it. Maybe. He starts walking. I'm remembering more and more things, but not the feeling of things. That is what is missing. But is the answer here? Is it? He reaches the Harley after dark. The nuclear device is still strapped into place. He looks everything over and sees there is no damage. None that is apparent, anyway. And he stands the bike on his kickstand. It'd be a real bitch to lose this bike after I put so much work into it. And then another piece of his puzzled past falls into place. A memory of moths circling and thumping dustily against the hissing Pullman lantern as he tightens the last nut in the restoration job on the Harley all those years ago. He'd found it behind an old garage and had paid the geezer who ran the place $100 for the rusty carcass. A steal, because 1937 Harley-Davidson L's weren't exactly lying around in those days. It had shaped up into a real beauty. 61 cubic inches of V-twin knucklehead, overhead valves, and a Schiebler carb strapped to a frame with heavy-gauge steel reinforcements. In 1937, Joe Petralli had set an American speed record of 136 miles per hour on an L. The bike was still fast, he taking it over the 110 mark while blowing out the back roads outside of town. Why can't I feel what I was? Even after he transformed into one of the living dead, he'd remember the general outline of his life, hovering distantly in his thoughts like a fog-shrouded mountain. But now, even the most intimate details were returning, dislodged by events that reminded him of similar incidents in the past. The memories, yes. But nothing beyond that. Nothing that could sustain him. It was like standing outside a restaurant window watching a man inside eat a steak, while his own stomach rumbled. Don't be alarmed, a voice speaks from the darkness. Hitch whips around, the meat hook raised like a hammer. I only want to talk. Hitch sees the suggestion of a shape, the smudge of a shadow that seems to gather the darkness around itself, standing across the road. He cannot make out any details. It does not move. Who are you? Hitch asks the darkness. I'm anybody, the voice answers. I'm everybody. What do you want? I want to talk. I don't have time to talk. Hitch cuts in and loops the chain around his arm, stepping toward the bike. He feigns a casual air, but prepares to strike out if whatever lay beyond the voice made any move to attack him. Amarillo, the voice hissed. The woman Dakota. Michigan. The Golem. A Mark 80 nuclear device. Hitch stands beside the Harley and doesn't say anything. He feels something stir within him. A tenuous flicker he cannot readily identify. The shape blurs and reforms in the grainy darkness, and he wonders briefly if it were really there, or if his fall from the bird thing had damaged the remaining lump of his brain. He says, "Who are you? What are you?" The voice chuckles. "I've been watching you. I've been guiding you. In truth, I brought you here." Hitch shakes his head, but it is a gesture rooted more in confusion than skepticism. "Nothing brought me here. I came because I wanted to." "Of course you did," the voice says reassuringly. "But now that you're here, why not talk? I have something to discuss with you. A proposition." "I'm not interested," Hitch answers. But that stirring of disorientation continues, tinged by something he can almost identify as curiosity. "I think you will be," the voice goes on. "I think you will be very interested." Hitch pulls out his gloves. He says nothing. "I want you to destroy the golem," the voice says abruptly, allowing the words to hang in the chilly night air. Hitch stretches his gloves taut over his finger bones. "I told you, I'm not interested." The voice does not immediately respond. Hitch thinks he sees movement, not of the shadow itself, but a darker shape within the shadow. Finally, the voice says, "It will be an enormous undertaking, yes, but I'm prepared to compensate you." "I don't want anything from you," Hitch mutters. "There is one thing," the voice whispers, "and you want it badly. I can see it in you as clearly as I can see your lacerated mind." Hitch climbs aboard the motorcycle. "I can give you what you want, my dead friend." Hitch levels the bike and flips back the kickstand with the toe of his boot. "I don't know who you are," Hitch begins, "or what you're talking about, but I'm not interested." He kicks the starter, and the engine chuffs and dies. He adjusts the choke and stands to kick the starter again. "We'll continue our conversation later," the voice says. Hitch kicks. The engine catches and hammers the dark quiet. He readjusts the choke, and the knucklehead settles to a softer rumble. He tows the transmission into first gear and wrestles the wheel to aim it at the pavement. A series of bright lights springs over the nearby hills, and over the growling V-twin, he can hear the whap 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 of helicopter blades cutting the dry night air. The voice speaks to him once more, this time obscenely close to his ear. "Everything is as it should be, my dead friend. Your time will come." Then it is gone. The lights sweep closer, and he is speared out of the night by a searchlight beam. He thinks he sees a dust devil whipping away from him. Then sand is flying everywhere as the choppers close in and surround him, pointing laser-targeted guns at a spot between his eyes. "I can give you what you want," it said. Is a voice in the dark my answer? "What in Dante's hell have you guys dragged into my hangar?" Hitch is lying on the concrete floor of what appears to be an aircraft hangar. Around him are helicopters, some in various stages of disassembly, and rows of parked Mustangs and P-38 Lightnings. A thought stands out in his memory. The Nazis called the P-38 the forked-tailed devil. Again, he sees himself as a child with a book about the air war, but the image holds together only briefly. He remembers a vague sense of pride about something he had read in the book. Then it is gone, and he's back in the hangar, surrounded by the men who had captured him in the desert. He cannot decide if they belong to a military unit or had simply banded together as civilians. They wore blue jeans and plaid flannel shirts and steel-toed boots. Yet their organization and discipline suggested the rigid hierarchy of an army squad. Stranger still, they are old. All of them. Men in their 70s, pot-bellied, white-haired, in some cases barely able to walk. They shuffle aside as another man steps through. He is as large as any of the others, sagging in all the wrong places, his lined face framed in a shock of white hair. But he carries himself with a muscular swagger that suggests an impregnability of will. From the way the others defer to him, Hitch guesses he is in command. "We don't know what it is, Colonel," one of the other men answers. "But it's not one of those Terminator things." Terminator? What does he mean by that? The man, the Colonel, snorts. Arnold Schwarzenegger will be relieved to hear that. This son of a bitch is ugly. Hitch had tried to escape the descending helicopters, but he'd been chased across the desert and picked off with a dart that trailed a conductive wire. An electric current running through the wire paralyzed him until the men could subdue him with a pair of gas-powered hydraulic extraction tools, what they laughingly called the jaws of death. Then they'd hauled him, swinging beneath a helicopter, to what appeared to be an abandoned airbase somewhere on the Nevada test range. Now they stand around him in a semicircle, puzzling over their catch. "He doesn't have the eye on his forehead," the man goes on, "but we know he's not just another zombie. He was riding a motorcycle. We brought it back in the Jolly Green, if you want to check it out. And he was carrying that," the man says, pointing to the warhead. It had been set down by the landing gear of the helicopter. The Colonel glances at it briefly. "Looks like a Merv, from a Minuteman or a Poseidon." The man nods. "Yes, sir. It's one of ours. 50-kiloton job. A product of the Pantex plant in Texas." The Colonel sighs. What in God's name would a zombie need with a hydrogen bomb? Especially a hydrogen bomb made in Texas. "Don't know, sir. We've been hearing some weird shit out of Texas. Scuttlebutt about Nazis, death rays, things like that." The Colonel waves him silent and steps closer to Hitch, leaning to peer into his eyes. Without taking his gaze from Hitch, he asks, "He's got a gold H drilled onto his front tooth. He's one styling bastard, ain't he? Does he talk?" "No, sir," the man answers. "Do you hear me?" the Colonel whispers to Hitch. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea? Or—" "What do you want us to do with him?" the other asks. The Colonel says nothing for a long moment. His eyes travel down Hitch's jacket and settles on something lying between folds in the leather jacket. Using only his index finger and thumb, he lifts a tiny corpse and holds it aloft. A scorpion. Hitch almost smiles. "I don't like this thing," the Colonel says. "I don't like it at all. My instincts say we should scoop out this thing's brain, if it's got a brain, and replace it with a pound of thermite. Still," he pauses, his gaze becoming unfocused. "This is something we haven't seen before. Maybe we should keep it a while. Let that wacko doctor who walked through the gate last week figure out what the hell is going on." "It's definitely not something we've seen before," the other man says. "But it's not one of the zomboids from the valley either." Zomboid. Is that what that bird thing was? The colonel drops the scorpion and stands abruptly, pulling at his jeans. "Lock it up until the doc has a chance to look at it," he says briskly. "Keep the bike, and hang on to that nuke, for God's sake. But after she's finished with this thing," and he nudges Hitch with his steel-jacketed boot toe, his voice layered with disgust, "take it out to the range and blow it to Kingdom Come." Is a voice in the dark my answer? After his 5th hour in the tank, Hitch's mind begins to wander. They locked him in a steel drum as big as a grain silo and utterly subtracted from any light source. It had once been used as a storage tank for heating oil. A gummy layer of grease still coated the bottom, and Hitch had given up trying to stand. He is slick with the stuff, and he guesses he would remain so for a long, long time, assuming he could find a way to escape. The doctor came by an hour ago, peering through a slit in the riveted steel tank hatch with a periscope-like boxed mirror. He heard her say, "We'll take some time to prepare an examination table for this one." Then she slid the portal shut and left. Meanwhile, Hitch explored the interior of the tank, hoping to discover a flaw in the 2-inch thick steel. No luck. It had been built a long time ago from the look of it, when steel was plentiful, and engineers didn't give a second thought to overbuilding their work. He could not punch through. So he was sitting and mostly thinking about what he would do once he was out of here. Snippets of memory flickered in and out of his thoughts. For some reason, he remembers bowling, of all things. As the hours lengthened to what seemed like days, the memory begins to assemble itself into a coherent narrative. He had bowled in a league on Friday nights. He had carried a 168 average that went up 5 pins when he traded the Columbia Blue Knight for the Beast, which he had put some muscle behind his full roller. Bowling. Why does he remember bowling? "Hello again, my dead friend." Hitch scrambles in the U's and slides along the curved wall, trying to find leverage. The voice in the desert. It had found him, here. "Can you talk now?" it says. "How did you get in here?" "Ah, curiosity," the voice observes. "That's good. That means I really do have what you want." "How would you know what I want?" "I know," the voice says. "I've been here a long time, and I've talked to a great many people. I have insights you couldn't imagine." Hitch peers into the dark and sees nothing, not even a darker place in the shadows. "I've been known to share those insights. Do you remember a Polish astronomer by the name of Nicholas Copernicus? It was I who suggested to him the planets revolve around the sun. He suffered for that one, but his suffering purchased man a greater understanding of the universe." Hitch says nothing. He wonders if he can quietly shimmy his way around the tank and surprise whatever lay behind the voice. He moves a tentative few inches and nearly slips. The voice seems to shift by the same margin, so that it remains directly opposite him. Or Albert Einstein. I helped him balance an equation at a critical juncture in his studies of relativity. Hitch again shifts to the right, and the voice moves in a corresponding manner. It seemed impossible that anyone could see in this perfect dark, but the voice was doing exactly that. Dozens of others. Plato, Aristotle, Martin Luther, Kepler, von Braun, Shockley, Kennedy, Alvarez. Many of the great ones. I gave them the nudges they needed at critical moments to complete their work, thus moving history in a direction that served my purpose. Now, I am offering to do the same for you, On a more personal level, of course. If I destroy the golem, Hitch says, trying to keep the stress out of his voice, as he strains to quietly slide closer to the voice. That is correct, the voice says. Why not do it yourself? I can't, the voice answers, but you can do it with my help. In exchange for the one thing in this world you want, my dead friend, the voice answers immediately. These memories creeping into your mind. They bring recollections of emotions, but not the emotions themselves. Am I correct? Hitch does not speak. I can change that. I can help you regain the feel of life. Do you understand what I am offering? I can give you exhilaration as you're motoring down the highway on your machine. I can give you rage, or glee, or courage, whatever you choose to feel as you bash in the skull of an opponent. Likewise, I can give you beauty when the sun rises and burns away the mist and colors the sky. The voice pauses. I can give you the luxury of hate and the wonder of love. Hitch stops. Love? That thought hadn't occurred to him. How would he find love in this world? Who or what would love him? The ability to feel will be enough for you, my dead friend, the voice adds lightly. Hitch sinks into the goo. It squishes between his finger bones. The words hang in his mind. The ability to feel. The voice seemed to be able to see inside him, gazing over his thoughts the way he had looked down upon the spinning land from the bird thing's grasp. It was the one thing in this world he wanted. The only ingredient missing from this preternatural existence. How many times had he used those words? And the voice's recognition of that fact gave it a fearful credibility that had not been there before. I will do this for you if you will destroy the golem for me, the voice says. So far you've told me almost nothing, Hitch says. I don't know who you are, or even what you are. Patience, the voice cautions. Or why you want me to destroy the golem. Worlds hang in the balance, my dead friend, the voice whispers, and Hitch remembers a vision of catastrophe from an earlier time. Your world and mine. Go on. Patience, the voice repeats. I'll answer your questions as we go along. What is important is that you believe. Hitch settles into the oil. For now, understand that the golem came to Death Valley for a reason. Yes? Death Valley. Does this place mean anything to you, beyond the superficial significance of its name? Do you know anything about its geology? Do you know, for instance, that Death Valley has an abundance of sodium and silicates and calcium oxides, my dead friend? Are you handy in the kitchen? No, of course not. You don't eat, the voice snickers. Do you know what that recipe produces? I flunked home ec, Hitch says. A joke, the voice brays. You aren't dead to the bone. That's good. That's very good. I'll reward you with a hint. Sodium, silica, and calcium oxide are used in the manufacture of glass. The golem has been making glass. The voice titters. And in Death Valley, not only are all the ingredients present, but sunlight is plentiful. That's how he operates his annealing ovens, with sunlight. So, Hitch snorts, what does this have to do with anything? Wait, the voice interrupts. Hitch hears no sound beyond a faint creaking noise arising from the tank itself. Then the voice whispers, The golem has sent a raiding party to this place. It will be here shortly. You must find your machine and the nuclear device and leave. Go to the hills that look like the moon, and I'll wait there for you. The tank hatch unlatches with a near-silent click and swings quietly open. A bar of dim twilight shines through. In the scattering of light, Hitch almost sees a dark, amorphous shadow move away from the door and settle into the layer of oil sludge coating the floor. Time is shorter than you think, it whispers. Hitch sets aside his questions. For now. He scrambles for the door. The ability to feel will be enough for me. Hitch slips through the darkness and eases into his shadow next to the hangar. He peers around the corner. Men, cloistered around the Harley and the nuke in a reverential circle. They are inspecting the warhead with great interest, and he can barely hear their voices as they speak in subdued, respectful tones. They have removed the access plate and are going over the arming mechanism. Hitch knows they cannot figure out the coding sequence that would arm the bomb, not without the aid of a computer. Even so, the detonation code will present a final and insurmountable barrier. Even with a Cray running through the tens of millions of possible alphanumeric permutations, weeks would be needed to arrive at the final combination. From what the voice had told him, these men might not be alive even minutes from now. He settles into the deeper shadows and waits. At some point, an alarm would be raised as the golem's raiding party, whatever that meant, arrived. He would use the diversion to climb aboard the Harley and ride out of here with the bomb. And then where? Back to the valley and the voice's tenuous promises of insights? Or into the deepest desert where the golem laid plans for disaster? He did not know what to think. The voice had been correct when it said he felt only memories of emotions, and that he would never be satisfied with mere echoes of a former refrain. But could the voice truly restore to him the one thing that might give meaning to this pale existence? He hears a door slam. It is followed by sharp, angry voices. He moves back to the corner of the hangar and peeks. The woman doctor is shouting. "He's gone! He's gone, for God's sake!" And then the men are shouting. Klaxons begin hooting, and lights wink on within the surrounding Quonset huts and cinder-block buildings. Searchlights sweep over the field in dazzling bowls of brilliance. The men in the hangar sprint past him and race off into the darkness. Only one man remains. He hefts an M16 and peers nervously across the rows of parked Mustangs and Lightnings and helicopters. Hitch slides a greasy finger around the meat hook and holds it away from his body at the ready. "Time to party," he whispers, and scrabbles into the hangar. He finds that crawling beneath the fighters, he could conceal himself and watch the other man's feet. When he reaches the midway point, he positions himself between the Jolly Green and the man and creeps toward the helicopter's open hatch. The nuclear device and the bike lie on the opposite side. He climbs inside. The footing is treacherous, and he is forced to step slowly and carefully between the ribbed spars that make up the floor. He almost reaches the opposite hatch when a helmet falls off of a stowing hook and bangs against the metal deck. The soldier jerks around and raises the gun snout. Hitch stops. He listens for footfalls and hears the man surreptitiously creeping toward the hatch. He fingers the hook and weighs his chances of nailing the man before he can aim and fire, and decides to wait. The man would have to climb aboard the chopper to see him, which would give Hitch a slight advantage. He slides behind a rack of flight suits hanging from a midship's bulkhead. He stands perfectly still. The man is in the chopper now, tiptoeing up to the flight deck, then back through the cabin. He stops when he sees the helmet lying on the deck. He seems to relax. He stoops, picks up the helmet, and smiles. He turns to the rack where Hitch is hiding. He stares directly into Hitch's eyes, his smile freezing around the edges. Hitch lets fly with the meat hook. It sinks into the man's left eye with a watery, squishing gush. Then the man's lips round into a surprised O. And he gasps. And that is the only sound he makes until his finger twitches against the trigger. He empties the clip in a wild spasm of lightning muzzle flashes and thunderous detonations that chew up the helicopter's interior. Hitch darts from his hiding place and, without looking back, jerks the hook free. Then the man screams, and the sound reverberates eerily throughout the helicopter and into the hangar. Sparks shower down from an overhead wiring harness, and Hitch can smell the unmistakable odor of high-octane fuel. He scrambles for the hatch and throws himself outside onto the hangar floor. He hears men shouting out of the darkness. He jumps onto the Harley and fires up the V-twin, then manhandles the nuclear device onto the bike and aims the front wheel at the hangar opening. A line of men is advancing across the concrete. A door bangs open. "What the devil is going on in my hangar?" The colonel. He's rounding the nose of the chopper. Hitch squeezes the throttle and spins the bike on his rear wheel and races directly toward the colonel, who freezes for a shocked moment and then fumbles to unbutton his holster and draw his pistol. Hitch scoops him up as if he were a child and pins his arms to his sides. "You and me are going for a little ride," he whispers into the man's ear, then turns the bike around and goes screeching toward the men advancing from the hangar door. The men stand uncertainly, their guns aimed. One soldier shouts, "For God's sake, hold your fire!" At the last second, the two men standing in the middle leap aside as Hitch roars by. And at that moment, something whooshes inside the helicopter. A wall of light and flame blows across the hangar, followed by a bone-rattling explosion that nearly launches Hitch and the colonel from the Harley. Hitch regains control of the bike and races out to the runway, where more vintage fighters sit parked in neat rows. He isn't sure which way to go, but he knows the runway will give him a chance to work the bike up to speed and put some distance between them and anybody who might be pursuing. "You've done a good job so far, son, but you might as well hang it up," the colonel shouts into the slipstream. He's trying to wiggle his arms free, but Hitch has a solid grip on him. "My boys will come after you with gunships. You'll look like a grease spot on the road." "They'll have to go through you first," Hitch shouts back and yanks the throttle wide open. Something appears in the dark ahead of them, moving fast. Silver wings and a buzzsaw of a propeller cutting the night. A Mustang rocketing down the runway for takeoff. Hitch leans the bike on its side and drags his knee on the concrete as the colonel screams, "Oh shit!" and the wingtip flashed overhead with only inches to spare. The horizontal stabilizer on the rear nicks the nuclear device with a metal ting. Then they are clear. Glancing back, Hitch sees the plane totter on its left landing gear. Then something black strikes it, and the Mustang goes up in a ball of fire. The colonel mutters, "Jesus! Oh my Jesus! Zomboids! They're attacking the base!" And Hitch can see them marching out of the darkness, big as water towers. Creatures built around a single, huge eye fringed with thorns, mounted atop gigantic muscular legs. They look like war machines from a science fiction novel as they tromp across the runway and advance on the network of buildings and hangars, firing thorns at the men who are blasting at them. Smaller, man-sized figures scramble beneath the larger ones, carrying bone-colored maces and scythes. Light from the burning hangar paints the scene with a baleful, flickering glow that to Hitch resembles nothing more than a scene from hell. "You've got to let me go!" the colonel screams, and he is weeping. Actually weeping. "Let me go, you dead bastard! I gotta stay here and help the boys." "No," Hitch says, but a note of uncertainty has crept into his voice. Even he is tempted to stay and fight the monstrous creatures. A rocket explodes in the eye of one of the giants, and it totters and collapses in flames. "Please, please," the man cries, and Hitch feels a distant blush of feeling creep over him, something that evaporates so quickly he cannot put a name to it. Pity, maybe, or even envy. Did he envy the colonel's loyalty to his men? Hitch cannot answer, but suddenly he knows that he'll be driving to the mountains that look like the moon for his appointment with the Voice, and eventually the Golem. He will accept the Voice's deal. "A voice in the dark," he whispers. "I'll take my chances." And they race into the night to the sound of weeping. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. By the mountains that look like the moon. They sit on rocks gathered in a chaotic jumble, like the rubble of a demolished city at the base of the eastern foothills of the Amargosa Range. The sky is beginning to lighten to the east, a wan smear of gray on the horizon. A coyote yaps. Tiny things skitter between gaps in the boulders. Hitch has bound the colonel's hands and is watching him, but the colonel has made no attempt to escape. His head hangs between his knees, and he does not move, except for his chest, which rises and falls with ponderous regularity. Hitch thinks of lizards slumbering in the sun. Old, defeated lizards. "What is your name?" His voice sounds preternaturally loud in the quiet darkness, but the colonel does not react. "What is your name, or do I tear out your tongue?" "We better find some place to lay up for the day," the colonel answers. "And I need water. I'm not dead." Water. Hitch hadn't thought of water. Or food, for that matter. The differences between himself and his living person jumped starkly to mind, denying any idea of similarity he had entertained during their escape from the airbase. "I'll find water and shelter. But first I want to know a few things. Like who you are and what you and your men were doing back there. What are those creatures that attacked you?" The colonel shakes his head wearily. "One thing at a time, buddy, okay?" He glances at Hitch with a sour expression. "What the hell are you? Some kind of fucked up Avon lady? I didn't know zombies could talk. I didn't even know they could think." "I'm asking the questions," Hitch says. "Tell me your name." The colonel looks away. "Frank Black. Retired Colonel Frank Black. U.S. Air Force. Reactivated for the Blackjack Air Force." He stares into the night. "We raced P-51s and P-47s on the circuit until the shit hit the fan. The real Air Force couldn't keep its jets in the air without the parts and the people to put them in, and things fell apart pretty quickly. These kids today don't know squat about discipline or sacrifice. They cut and ran. So a bunch of us old farts got together and found us a helicopter base out in the test range and rearmed the birds. We're just screwing around, you know?" He chuckles. "Then the zomboids showed up in the valley, and we had a real fight on our hands." "The Golem," Hitch fills in. The colonel turns to him. I don't know anything about any golem. But there were these things. What things? Hitch interrupts. The Colonel looks away again. Just your garden variety zombies at first. But then we began to see new things. Super zombies we call Terminators. You know, from the movie. And giant zombie centipedes. And flying zombies. And walking eyes. Like the ones that invaded the base where you shanghaied me. All kinds of weird crap. We caught one of the Terminators and dissected it. It had been built. That last word rolls off his tongue like a wad of phlegm. Hitch nods. That fit with what he had seen of the bird as it carried him across the desert. We didn't know what was happening, he continues. Those things were moving across the countryside, rounding up the zombies. We figured they were gathering raw materials to build more zomboids. But we didn't know who was running the show, or how. The jewel in the foreheads, Hitch volunteers. The Colonel nods. The eyes. They're not jewels. Glass fragments attached to their skulls. We've been trying to figure them out. We think they're some kind of communication device. The voice had said the golem was making glass. That would account for the eyes, though the ultimate reason for building the zombie creatures continued to elude Hitch. Did the golem have designs on taking over the planet, as the little Hitler had sought to do with his ray machine? Hitch thought that was unlikely. Ambitions of dominance were strictly human qualities, and the golem, from what little Hitch knew, did not operate under any motivation that could be considered human. What, then, could he be doing? Hitch wished he had pried the prophecy from the Heavy G character he had run across in Nebraska. The creatures herded zombies onto old steam locomotives operating around the valley, and hauled them away, which was fine with us. Hell, they were doing us a favor by getting rid of the dead. But then they attacked, the Colonel said quietly. They attacked anyone who came near the valley. They were establishing some kind of perimeter, and they would not let anything, living or dead, cross that line. They widened their net until our base fell inside the perimeter. That's when we went to war. A black widow spider tiptoes over Hitch's finger bones, waggling its forefeet, as if it were touching something very hot. Moments later, it draws its legs in on itself, curls into a dead ball, and falls to the rocks. A lizard darts from a crevice and tongues it up. The lizard twitches into convulsions. Hitch flicks it away. We couldn't get inside the valley, not even by air, the Colonel goes on. They had too many of the flying things, and the thorn shooters were everywhere. It was worse than Plosty out there. Too bad, because we've got a cache of perfectly good napalm going to waste. But one of our guys did manage to fly over the valley. Just once. He saw what they were doing out there. He told us the whole thing by radio until his plane was shot down. He said they were... Busy, 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 the voice interrupts. Hitch jerks around. The Colonel scrambles to his feet and whirls unsteadily, the chains around his wrist shaking with a sharp, metallic rattle. The voice had come from behind, but as Hitch's gaze jumps over the rocks, he sees nothing. Only after careful scrutiny does a subtle movement become apparent. Sand is flittering down between boulders and pouring into crevices, a slow, nearly silent flood that eases its way downhill. "What the hell was that?" the Colonel asks in a husky whisper. "You've brought a friend," the voice comments. The words seem to emanate from many different places on the hillside, lending them an unfocused, almost ethereal quality. "Why?" The Colonel starts to shout something, and Hitch raises a bony hand to silence him. I needed the weekend pass, he says. He'll be of no use to you now, the voice says dreamily. Either let him go or kill him, but be quick about it. Time is shorter than you think. Not so fast, Hitch says. Before I go any farther, I want information. Sand hisses over nearby rocks. I told you I would answer your questions, my dead friend. But you must be patient. The sand halts momentarily, so that a lethal silence falls over the hillside. The golem is nearly finished with his work. Show yourself, the colonel shouts into the night. Or are you afraid to die? The sand is pouring into a central location about 100 yards uphill, in a small concavity between boulders. A hillock is forming. A moot point for you, little man, the voice hisses. You're already dead. The colonel snorts, but there's a nervous edge to the sound. What do you think several hours exposure to a high-intensity radiation source would do to a person's constitution? The voice smirks. The colonel's expression goes rigid. He glances back at the hydrogen bomb strapped to the Harley, then looks away. He says nothing. You told me the golem was making glass, Hitch says. You were talking about the fragments attached to the skulls of the manufactured creatures. No, the voice answers. The fragments you've seen are the reason he went to Michigan. That's where it had been moved. Where what had been moved? The hillock continues to grow. Its edges lap over surrounding rocks. Oh, I don't know, the voice answers cagily. I suppose we can call it the Rosetta Stone. Before Hitch can say anything, the voice goes on. It was discovered in 1968 by a small mining company operating out of Shiprock, New Mexico. The company's mineralogist was naturally unable to identify it, but he noticed it exhibited peculiar physical properties that offer considerable practical applications. The company was experiencing financial difficulties, so it sold the stone to your American government, where it was handed over to something called the Central Intelligence Agency. Pff, the colonel spits. Intelligence at the CIA? Be quiet, Hitch snaps. What was unusual about this stone? Sand cascades onto the hillock, which has now become a small dune. It regrew itself, the voice said quietly. When pieces were removed from the original replaced the lost mass, drawing from an energy source that cannot be identified. The colonel shakes his head, muttering, Fairy tales. And when the original was stimulated, say, through a vibration, the voice goes on, the pieces vibrated simultaneously, no matter how far apart the two were. The colonel laughs. That is fucking impossible. And the pieces could be fastened to any object. For instance, a speaker diaphragm mounted on the communication console of a nuclear submarine. Tell me, my dead friend, are you familiar with a communication system called ELF? Hitch shakes his head no. ELF was a network of transmission facilities, an underground antenna built in Michigan, designed to send low-frequency radio waves through the ground for purposes of communicating with submerged missile submarines. That was the information given to the public. But ELF was much more than that. At its heart was the Rosetta Stone, and your Central Intelligence Agency used it to keep in touch with its operatives around the world, and above the world, too. Virtually every branch of the military and civil intelligence community uses the ELF network for communication. If your government had not been so skeptical of psychic phenomena, it might have discovered even more insidious uses for the Rosetta Stone. But it didn't. And then this unfortunate business with the reanimated dead came about, and that ended that. Until the golem came along. What does the golem want with this stone? Hitch asks. The dune is spreading down the hill, sifting among the cracks and fissures between boulders. Something seems to move beneath the surface of the sand, something large and serpent-like. Waves undulate across the dune's wide slopes. What does the golem want with the Rosetta Stone? It wants the same thing your government wanted, my dead friend. The voice whispers, its tone now sinister. It wants to send a message. To communicate with these zomboids all over the world? The colonel shouts at the sand dune. A coyote yaps in the hills somewhere. Its barking sounds like laughter. No, the voice answers. The creatures were built to defend and sustain the golem's installation in the heart of Death Valley. The tower, the colonel interrupts. The vision, Hitch remembers. A tower in the desert. All movement within the sand dune halts. Then the voice says, a tower of glass. That's what our pilot said, the colonel rants. It's like a radio tower. This golem thing of yours is building a tower so it can send message to zomboids all over the world. No, the voice snaps. Geysers of sand explode into the dawn. Its purposes far outweigh anything you can guess, which is why you must be going. The tower will be finished today, and when it is finished, the golem will send his message. What message? Hitch asks. The sand begins to roil, as if a plug had been yanked somewhere below the hill to drain everything away. Go to a place down the road below you. A small unpaved road bears to the right at a curve. Go into the hills where the road ends. You will find a cavern. Enter that cavern. I will show you a tunnel that leads to the golem's... The voice pauses. Workshop. Tell me why, Hitch insists. Patience, the voice whispers, sounding farther away now, as if it had funneled through a distant pipeline. It's important that you believe. The sand swirls into a single point and vanishes. Tell me, Hitch shouts at the barren hill. A column of sand explodes straight up, shooting hundreds of feet into the air, where it disperses into a cloud of grainy particles that rain down on them. The voice does not answer. Hitch stands, the chain and meat hook rattling at his side. Sand clings to his chaps where glutinous patches of bunker oil were smeared. The sky is brightening noticeably to the east, and an eerie quiet has fallen over the land as the night creatures move to shelter, and the day creatures prepare to emerge. You can stay, he says to the colonel. I don't need you anymore. The colonel shakes his head. If what your spook said is true, he mutters, nodding at the hydrogen bomb strapped to the bike, I'm going. I don't know what this golem of yours is up to, but I want to be there when he bites the big one. Hitch begins picking his way over the rocks to the bike. It would be stupid, really, to let this man come along, but he finds himself agreeing to the idea. It is an act of sympathy, really, and maybe that's what he is agreeing with. The colonel scrambles to follow. As Hitch straddles the bike and flips up the kickstand, he says to the colonel, Don't get in my way, or I'll kill you. The colonel hoists himself onto the back of the bike. Hey, pal, remember, I'm as good as dead, right? And Hitch thinks, maybe I am too. They ride. They reach the cavern as the sun bursts over the horizon, spraying radiant spokes of ochre and sienna over the hills behind them. The temperature seems to instantly shoot up another 10 degrees, and Hitch can imagine the hellish heat that will bake and suffocate the countryside later in the day. He wonders if the same thoughts are running through the colonel's head. No, He's thinking of something far worse, Hitch tells himself as he unstraps the black and white checkered cone from the bike. He's wondering what it will be like, what he will be like afterwards. And in his mind, he has skipped that moment where life ends and afterlife begins. That's the human condition. Preservation of self. He still does not accept the idea that he will die. Nobody alive could do that. They would die. Hitch slings the bomb over his shoulder and trudges toward the cavern. For me, it is a given. The Colonel follows. They walk into the cavern entrance, and the Colonel gropes about for a moment, stumbling over the uneven floor. I'm dying of thirst. I hope there's a Coke machine in there, he pants. Coke adds life. You should have thought about that before you came, Hitch says dryly. The cavern falls into darkness, a seamless darkness that suggests great depth. It occurs to Hitch that he has not brought any kind of light, and even with his unusual vision, he would not be able to see. Do you have any matches? He asks the Colonel. The man shakes his head. Seems like I remember somebody snatching me out of my hangar before I had a chance to pack my things. Maybe that bomb of yours glows in the dark. Hitch makes a mental note to kill this man when he has finished with the golem. He ventures farther into the cavern and tries to make out the tunnel the voice said would be there. But all he sees is black. He hunts around the cavern floor for something he might use to make a torch. But the interior is covered with nothing but rock, sand, and heaps of what looks to be tailings. From deep within the cavern, he hears a distant voice whisper, "Come this way." "It's that spook of yours," the Colonel mutters. "What is he? Or do you know? A ghost? A demon? What makes you so sure he isn't leading you into a trap?" "We made a deal. He could do something for me. I could do something for him. It's that simple." "Will you get a life?" the Colonel cries, then stops and shakes his head, an expression of wry humor on his face. "What the hell could you possibly want from him? And why do you think he'll follow through on his end?" Hitch pauses a moment, then says, "I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. I'll take my chances and hope he does his part." "Ha!" the Colonel barks. "For an intelligent zombie, you sure are stupid." "And for a dying man," Hitch says without turning to him, "you sure are an asshole. I could solve that problem for you." "No doubt. So press on, General MacArthur." They feel their way into the cavern. The darkness seals them in and fills the world completely, siphoning away all sounds, but the ear-ringing silence, and all odors, but the scent of cool, dry earth. A circle of wan light quietly shimmers into existence. It rings a black hole in the cavern wall. The Colonel gasps and halts his careful shuffle between the mounds of tailings, and Hitch pauses too, trying to decide if the light foretells some new threat. "A tunnel to the golem's workshop," the voice whispers, sounding so far away it might have arisen from a different cavern connected to this one by a maze of smaller passages. "This was to become a water conduit for the towns surrounding the valley," the voice adds, "but it was never completed." "We go through that to find the golem?" Hitch says to the light. "It leads to a cavern that opens onto the valley." The voice comes from everywhere. That is where the golem assembles his creatures. A train is running from the cavern to the tower, carrying cargo and parts for those that protect the tower. Hitch notices the pause, as if a description of whatever guarded the tower could not be put to words. You may conceal yourself aboard the train and ride to the tower. There, you must position your device and detonate it. Where's this golem thing going to be? The colonel says loudly, his voice booming over the cavern wall. Why don't we just strap his ass to the bomb and light it off? Your friend is still with you, the voice echoes lightly. I may need him. Zomboid bait. The colonel snorts. The golem will be at the top of the tower. You have no need to go there. Position the device at the base of the tower and arrange for it to detonate. Then leave. And after that, Hitch adds, you'll live up to your end of our deal? I promise you, the voice says. But you must not allow the golem to transmit his message. If you do, I will cease to exist at that moment. Do you understand? You said you'd explain this to me as we went along. Yes, the voice answers, and I intend to do that. But time is shorter than you think. Climb into the boring. I will illuminate the tunnel as long as I am able. When you have reached the assembly cavern, take the train to the tower. Hitch gives the meat hook and chain a tentative shake, then moves for the wheel of light on the opposite rock face. The colonel sighs and follows, muttering under his breath. As they climb into the boring, the colonel says aloud, I feel like I'm climbing into my own grave. You're as good as dead, remember? Hitch tells him, then turns, and, on his right hand and knees, begins to crawl forward, his left arm snug around the bomb. The boring is roughly circular, perhaps 4 feet in diameter, punctuated with smaller side tunnels. The surface is smooth, except for the occasional rough edge where rock has shifted since the boring was made. It is coated in a fine talc-like powder that puffs into the still, dead air as they shuffle deeper into the shaft. It hangs in the wan light like special effect fog in a horror movie. The colonel sneezes and spits snot. This shit is going to play hell with my allergies. Hitch says nothing. The light is dim, a pale bluish-purple flicker that seems to spin about the circular walls like a subterranean aurora borealis. It races up and down the shaft in peristaltic pulses, giving the impression of movement. And it reminds Hitch not so much of a grave, as the colonel had said, but a massive throat, maybe a python's throat, stretching into the infinite darkness. He remembers an incident from his childhood when he and a friend climbed into a storm drain culvert that opened into a small, reed-choked pond near their neighborhood. As they went deeper into the pipe, the light grew dimmer and dimmer, until the far end of the pipe was no more than a dot of brightness, the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, and they were surrounded by catastrophic gloom. After about an hour of crawling, the colonel gasps, "Wait a minute." Hitch hears him stop. At that moment, the light goes out, and the darkness crashes in around them. A tiny squeak slips past the colonel's lips. Hitch stops. The voice said it would light our way for a short time. It seems that time is over. The colonel does not answer. Hitch looks back over his shoulder, but sees nothing but the dark. He cannot hear the colonel breathing. "Are you there?" he asks quietly. A faint scuffling sound, and then the colonel hisses, "There! Did you hear it?" Hitch does not move. He had heard something, but he thought it was the colonel, his boots slipping on the chalky surface. And then he hears it again. A faint scraping, the sound of something moving over the dusty rock, and deliberately doing so in a quiet, surreptitious manner. "We're not alone," the colonel says thickly. Hitch can almost feel the man's terror, and he is struck again by the memory of his and his friend's excursion into the culvert. They had planned to go into the storm drain system as far as they could walk, without getting their clothes wet or muddy. Because somebody, his mother. My God, how long has it been since he's thought of his mother? Would be angry about his clothes. So they went back to the big mains that serviced the neighborhood streets, the occasional grate letting in just enough light to see by. The footing was treacherous because the bottom was layered in slimy mud, but the place was so damned interesting. The mains were cluttered with debris of all kinds, leaves and branches, which could be expected, but other things too. Hubcaps, mangled tricycles, crunched garbage cans, a baseball glove Hitch examined and wondered if he should try to salvage. Lots of interesting stuff. And as they stood there amid the muck, pouring over the jetsam that had ended up in the drains, his friend paused and cocked an ear and said quietly, "Something is coming." Hitch didn't like that word, something, because it meant that whatever was coming wasn't a person, and nothing belonged down here, person or otherwise. So it wasn't a good thing. It was a bad thing, and instantly, images flashed through his mind. Rats the size of cats, or alligators flushed down the toilet after their owners decided they didn't make such great pets. Or worse, something nobody had ever heard of before. Not even the people who inhabited the monster movies they showed on Channel 5 every afternoon at 3:30. Something large and dark and toothy, lurching through the tunnels, attracted by the sound, or maybe the scent, of two curious little boys. They stood there a moment, trading wide-eyed stares, and the unbroken panic that surged between them finally galvanized them to run. And they went tearing off down the tunnels, slipping and careening into the mud, and not caring, sure that whatever lurked behind them heard them trying to escape, and was chasing them. Coming closer as they skittered down that final stretch of culvert that opened onto the pond. Drawing closer, so that at the moment they paused at the lip of the pipe, the terror that clenched their hearts giving way to exhilaration as they prepared to jump to safety. It would snatch them back into the dark, and they would scream. My God, they would scream. Hitch could not remember the terror of that moment, but he can remember feeling it, and he hears it now in the Colonel's sludgy voice. He moves back and grabs the man by the shoulder. The Colonel jerks and spits out a tight gasp. "It's back there," the Colonel whispers. "Coming this way." "Go around me," Hitch says. "Keep going. If something tries to stop us, I'll handle it." The Colonel scrambles around Hitch, shrinking away from his touch. Hitch shifts the warhead in his grasp and begins to follow the man. Over the sounds of their crawling, he thinks he can hear something moving toward them. Or maybe it is a presence he senses. Whichever, it is drawing nearer, and Hitch makes sure the meat hook is free, should he need to drop a warhead and defend himself. The Colonel whispers, "I think I see a light ahead," and quickens his pace. He begins to pull ahead of Hitch, and now Hitch can definitely hear something behind them, a rat-like scritching sound and a tapping patter that suggests hordes of unseen things scurrying through the claustrophobic dark toward them. His mind again flashes back to that moment when, as a boy, he balanced at the tip of the culvert to jump into the soft sand below, certain that whatever had chased them through the storm drains was scrabbling through the pipe to grab him at the moment he leapt and haul him back into the dank shadows. To do what? He can't remember what his imagination told him, but that lack of information only heightened his terror, so that when he jumped and landed jarringly and rolled into a sprinter's crouch, he ran as fast as he could without looking back, until he made it to the other side of the pond, where he glanced at the mouth of the pipe and saw something. Hitch stops and sets the warhead down. He hisses to the colonel, "You keep going," and turns to face whatever is creeping up on them. He grabs the meat hook by the shaft and holds it beside him, looping the chain around his left wrist. "I need to see what I'm up against," he thinks. And as the rattling clamor draws nearer, he hears a small sigh brush the walls of the tunnel. The cold blue light flares within the shaft, and then dies. A flashbulb pop of brilliance that lasts only a sliver of a moment. But in that fragmentary pulse of light, he gets a clear look at what is approaching, and he wonders what he would have done as a boy if he glanced back into the culvert and had seen this thing crawling toward him. It fills the shaft and stretches beyond the field of illumination, suggesting a gigantic subterranean snake made up of thick, ropey cables of muscle, undulating within a tubular cage of bones. Its skull tapers and then widens into sprays of curved, bone-like pincers that clack together like bear traps snapping shut. At its heart are concentric rows of dagger-like teeth that look as if they could pulverize solid rock. The thing is almost upon Hitch when the light sweeps through the shaft. Hitch guesses it was the voice that worked that small miracle for him, and the sudden brilliance seems to disorient the creature momentarily. Hitch acts without thinking, bringing the curved edge of the meat hook down in a vicious blow that smashes through several of the snapping pincers. Before the thing can react, he smashes at it again and hears a splintering snap of bones caving in as more of the pincers break off. Then something grabs his left leg just above the knee and clamps down. He can feel the rotten flesh giving way. He hears his knee joint creak as the forces of compression strain the dead ligaments. He hammers at the thing's skull and batters through the outside layer of bone, the blows taking on a hollow note as the skull collapses into broken wedges. Something gives way inside Hitch's body with a pop that seems to lift his body from the tunnel floor, and instantly he can no longer move his left leg. He brings the meat hook down with all his strength and feels the creature's skull split entirely in half. At its heart is a tiny, firefly glow of red. The eye. And he aims a final blow at the jewel. It splits into fragments with an explosive whoosh. The force blows Hitch backward, free from the creature's grasp. He wrestles the warhead into his arm and crawls away, dragging his leg. Between the weight of the bomb and his crippled leg, he can barely move. He glances back at the monster and feels a greater sense of urgency that he get out of this shaft. The creature's body is aflame, with a bloody glow the color of the jewel, and it strobes like a dome light of an emergency vehicle, each cycle arriving a little sooner, the light pounding more intensely. It has the look of something about to explode. As Hitch rounds a shallow bend in the tunnel, he sees a tiny pinprick of brightness ahead of him. The light behind has become a solid wall of illumination, and he knows some critical mass is about to be exceeded. He drags himself over the dusty surface as quickly as his fractured body will allow, and hopes that he can crawl out whatever is about to happen. The tunnel explodes. He feels it before he hears it. A fist of heat and expanding gases slamming into him, followed by a bellowing roar as the creature is suddenly consumed by whatever fire lay within the jewel and explodes. Hitch wraps his arms around the bomb as he is blasted through the remaining length of tunnel like a rifle slug. The dot of light in the distance approaches rapidly, and then it is behind him as he rockets to clean air. He has a quick impression of sunlight to his left, a cavernous recess in the side of a mountain, and structures far below, with monstrous figures moving about. Then he is arcing downward. He rotates his body in mid-flight to cushion the bomb, then watches as he plummets toward one of the structures, a barn-like arrangement of bones, covered with a patchwork fabric of yellowed skin. At the last moment, he looks away and closes his eyes, and he remembers a scene from an old movie where a military pilot rides a hydrogen bomb down to its target, waving his hat and shouting, "Yahoo!" all the way. How improbable that had seemed to him at the time, he remembers thinking. Then he smashes into the roof. Hitch is surrounded by a collection of creatures that might have slithered from a maniac's nightmares. They are gargoyle-like monstrosities with heads that sprout tusks and fangs, walking hands with eyes perched atop waggling stalks, rolling baskets of bone and muscle that have no apparent purpose beyond bouncing around the landscape like tumbleweeds driven by the wind, and tall will-wish constructions of slender bones and tendons that rear above all the others like dead aspens. Each is equipped with a glowing red fragment of the Rosetta Stone. He has been hauled to his feet and pinned to the wall by two of the zomboids, the airmen called Terminators. They are roughly man-shaped, but their anti-anthropomorphic similarities end. Their height is at least 9 feet, he guesses, and their arms and legs have been augmented with massive cables of muscle, one layered atop the other, that gives them the look of freakish bodybuilders. Hitch has struggled to free himself from their grip, but their strength is much greater than his. He cannot move. He hears a commotion outside and wonders briefly if the colonel has been found. But as he gains a bearing on the sound, it reminds him of heavy machinery in operation, a huge engine at work. Maybe a steam locomotive. The colonel had said the golem used trains to haul dead ones to this place. The throng of creatures surrounding him begins to move aside, as if responding to his silent command. At the entrance to the enclosure, a procession of otherworldly monsters appears, winged creatures that bristle with bony ridges and extrusions of cartilage that seem to offer no function beyond appearance, and a pair of squat, headless tripods made of solid muscle and heavy femurs that grip a long, slender pole. Dangling from the end of this pole is a circular cage of rib bones. Inside sits a woman's head. Her eyes are open. Her gaze darts back and forth across the room in a way that reminds Hitch of a jungle cat sizing up its prey before making that final leap. Dangling from her neck through the bars of her cage is a segmented length of windpipe attached to a pair of ragged lungs that pulsate in an obscene parody of respiration. Her eyes fasten on Hitch. Her lips part like a ventriloquist's dummy. The old ones who called themselves men have passed. You are the first of the new ones. Was it the golem speaking to him through this perverse mouthpiece? You are the first of the new ones. You will be the last. The circle will close with you. He isn't sure what she means, but his imagination conjures images of sledgehammers battering at whatever it is that keeps his mind intact. The Terminators jerk him away from the wall and lead him outside. Bring his cerements, the head says, and a tripod stomps over and hoists the nuclear device into a fireman's carry. Hitch strains to see if it has been damaged in the fall. His exterior looks dented and a little worse for the wear, but otherwise it looks okay. But he wouldn't know the answer to that question until the moment arrived to set the timer, if that moment arrived at all. Events suggested it wouldn't. The Terminators drag him outside. Sunlight blazes at the mouth of the recess, which stretches across the base of the mountain for at least a mile. Huge pillars of bone, fused into a solid mass by layer upon layer of ligament and wrapped in spiral bands of muscle, stretches from floor to ceiling. At the base of each pillar, and at the point where the pillars reach the ceiling, a fibrous mass of connective tissue virtually covers the rock. Hitch feels moisture splatter his cheek. A mist like rain is falling, But the substance is not water. It resembles pus. It quickly dries in the withering heat. All about the floor of the cavern are long tables, at which bony, spider-like creatures carefully disassemble the living dead and put them together in new ways. A basket of walking hands is carried to another table, where fragments of ruby glass are inserted into their wrists. Giant walking eyes are surrounded by scaffolds of bone, as the spiders work furiously to attach bone to ligament and muscle to joint. Great mounds of parts, bones, coiled ropes of tendon, eyes, teeth, greasy piles of intestines rest along the far wall, awaiting use in the golem's bestiary. An old steam locomotive chuffs and wheezes at a loading dock. Cattle cars are being unloaded, their cargo of living dead herded to the tables for dismantling, while other cargo, racks of tongues, baskets of eyes, and huge spools of arteries are carried aboard. A vision of Nazi death camps swims menacingly in Hitch's mental eye. The Terminators carry him to the train. A flatbed car immediately behind the coal carrier is equipped with what appears to be a giant fist. They haul him up to the thing and force him against it. Blunt, finger-like digits curl around his arms and legs, holding him in place, while the Terminators rush off to quell some disturbance among the living dead that are being herded off the cattle cars. The tripod bearing the nuke tromps aboard and squats at the opposite end of the car, while a huge rack of tongues, strung up like peppers set out to dry, is loaded to Hitch's right. A clear space in front allows Hitch to see the engineer, a lanky, many-armed creature stoking the boiler with what appears to be bricks of compressed flesh. The tripods maneuver the woman's cage head into place before Hitch, at eye level. Her cat-like gaze flicks across his body. "You are the first of the new ones," she croaks, her tattered lungs barely rasping out the words. "You will be the last." Then she is gone. The engine spouts a billowing gust of steam and black smoke, and the car lurches forward, slows momentarily, and then eases away from the dock. They rattle and bump out of the shadow of the mountain recess, gaining speed. And suddenly, the sunlight blasts down with a ferocity that is almost palpable. The tracks lead straight into Death Valley, which shimmers and dances in the scalding air. Hitch pulls tentatively against the fist thing holding him, but it's like trying to bend steel beams. He's immobilized. The meat hook dangles at his side. He thinks it's strange they haven't taken it from him. And stranger still, they haven't taken the nuclear device to some other place for safekeeping. He wonders if they understand the purpose of either. They. It's not they, he thinks. It is only the golem. In fact, maybe the golem does not understand the concept of weapons, or it is so confident in its ability to thwart aggression that it sees them as inconsequential. If so, Hitch hopes he is given the chance to demonstrate to the golem what a few pounds of plutonium can do. The rack of tongues is swaying as the train picks up speed, and as Hitch watches, each tongue begins to writhe as if it is attempting to speak. Wind whistling through the wriggling mass assumes a strange, warbling tone. Hitch listens more closely, trying to screen out the chugging of the locomotive and the sound of steel wheels clacking on the tracks. He hears words taking shape. "I fear you will be the death of me." The voice. "Funny, I had the same feeling about you," Hitch shouts into the whipping wind. The tongues sway like a set of wind chimes. The train will stop at the annealing ovens to pick up special cargo. A crystal chalice, if you will, for the golem's tower. Then it will continue on to the tower. Once this chalice is in place, the tower will be finished. The golem will begin his transmission. You must escape and detonate the device before that happens. Hitch grunts as he strains once again at the fist thing holding him. I follow you up to the part where I escape, he groans. At that point, I run into trouble. The voice chuckles. A sense of humor, my dead friend, albeit a dry one. Appropriate for such an arid climate. I'm glad you see the humor in this. If you have not freed yourself by the time the train reaches the tower, I will do what I can to help you. Though, as you have seen, my ability to help is limited. Limited isn't the word I'd use, Hitch shouts. The tongues curl and uncurl and click against one another. Hitch relaxes into the fist's grip and tries to ease his arm free. What is this chalice? The voice pauses a moment, then says, It is the cradle into which the Rosetta Stone will be placed. The golem will then... The voice hesitates again, as if searching for a word, and continues, Pour his life into the stone, which will suffuse the tower with its energy. That will be his message. What kind of message? Hitch yells. In the distance, he can see a structure rising out of the salt flats. A squat pillbox of a building, surrounded by concentric circles of mirrors. A simple message, really, the voice whispers. A summoning. What your kind calls a beacon. Hitch halts his struggles. A beacon? The word can bring a number of interpretations, but the first that springs to mind is spacemen? Are you familiar with the work of Luis Alvarez? The voice asks. Hitch shakes his head. Alvarez was a geologist who first linked the presence of the element iridium with the mass extinction of dinosaurs during the Upper Cretaceous period, the voice explains. His thesis revolutionized developmental selection theory. What thesis? Hitch shouts. The train shudders and slows as the collection of buildings nears. What kind of bullshit are you talking about? The tongues relax, drooping against one another like wilted leaves. Hitch catches the barest whisper of a word. Patience. And then all he can hear is the roaring hiss of escaping steam as the engineer vents the boiler and the great locomotive slows further, and then snorts to a jerky halt. They are stopped beside a huge building of conventional construction. Corrugated aluminum panels attached to a wooden framework, supported by a scattering of load-bearing pilings. At the top is an opening as big as the hangar door at the airbase. A curved mirror is positioned at the mouth of the opening and angled downward, channeling reflected sunlight cast by an army of mirrors that surround the building. Hitch guesses the reflected sunlight heats a vapor unit rigged to a turbine, which would generate electricity to power ovens. Doors at the base of the building swing open. Inside, Hitch can see tall stacks of glass bricks packed off to the side. A wheeled platform made of heavy timbers is pushed outside and down a ramp to the waiting train by a crew of things. Creatures with stumpy legs and gigantic, muscular hands. Positioned in the middle of the platform is a scaffolding that supports a glass bowl the size of a large iron kettle. The Chalice. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The crew of pushers maneuvers the platform to a position next to Hitch's car and carefully carries the bowl, scaffolding and all, onto the car. There they secure it with lines and then tramp off the train in single file, like the demented caricatures of figures in a Disney animated feature. The engine screeches abruptly and the train surges forward, moving in clumsy fits and starts. Hitch tries again to unpin himself from the fist's grasp. The voice said the chalice was the final piece to be placed in the golem's tower, and once it was in position, the golem would begin his transmission, thus bringing to pass a calamity the voice hinted was responsible for mass extinctions in the past. Hitch can remember nothing of his schooling in the subject, but guesses the Cretaceous was a time when dinosaurs lived. Dinosaurs were extinct now, and Hitch can only vaguely recall that there were different explanations as to why the giant lizards died out. The train picks up speed, clacketing over the tracks as it plunges farther into the desert. A protruding finger of hills juts into the salt fields, and the tracks disappear in a bend around the farthest joint in the hills. Hitch gazes skyward and sees a dozen of the winged things circling there, like vultures. Scattered across the salt fields are zomboids of every size and makeup. They seem to be standing sentry. Seeing them, Hitch realizes that even if he did escape the fist's grasp, he would have no way of fleeing the train. Anything that strayed onto the desert floor would be seized upon by one of the monsters and destroyed. The train follows the curving track around the base of the hills, wobbling against the rails and blowing out thick clouds of steam and smoke. Hitch sits there and watches as the hills peel back to reveal a tower. Hitch cannot believe its height. It seems to defy gravity as it soars above the desert floor, a glittering pillar of nearly transparent glass. It catches the sunlight and reflects it in an uncountable thousand of prismatic spangles that give it the surreal aspect of a fairy tale castle. It rests on a huge base that tapers into a slender needle of glass at the very top. Were there clouds in the sky, Hitch muses, the top would pierce them and go on, perhaps into outer space itself. It is simply an impossible creation, and Hitch wonders what kind of magic or engineering trickery the golem used to keep the thing intact. As the train draws within a few miles of the base, Hitch can see things moving along the tower's staggering walls. Distance lends a frightening scale to the creatures riding up and down its sloping glass planes. They are perched aboard elevator platforms, like obscene window washers plying their vertiginous trade. Then he sees what waits at the tower base, and he cannot think of any word or combination of words to apply perspective to what he was seeing. 4 figures sit at the north, south, east, and west poles of the tower base. 4 mountainous figures. They are huge, even by the golem's grandiose standards. They dwarf the walking eyes that skitter at their feet like terrified acolytes. They resemble the half-men, half-beasts carved into ancient pagan statuary. A snake-like woman, her ribbed chest studded with row upon row of unswept, chitinous breasts. A scorpion with the torso and face of a man. A man-like anemone thing ringed with hundreds of muscular arms and thrusting spikes. An insect woman, equipped with gigantic, snapping pincers and a forest of gnashing teeth. They stand at the 4 corners of the tower's base, large and unfathomable, and Hitch can imagine frightened worshippers 1,000 years from this day offering human sacrifices to their ossified bones. The train chugs on toward the nightmare gathering. Hitch watches and soaks it in, not knowing if he should believe what he was seeing, and not believing he could possibly do what he had come here to do, and escape. The spidery engineer bleeds steam from the engine, and the train shudders and begins to slow. The tower eclipses the sun, but its shadow is weirdly mottled and twisted, like the heat waves that distort the horizon into a dancing, watery line. The monstrous figures rear above and gaze implacably into the distance, some indescribable alien hardness in their monolithic presence. The train slams to a stop and sits on the tracks, hissing and bleeding heat. An army of the pusher things scrambles onto the car and hauls the chalice and the nuclear vice to another wheeled platform parked at the edge of the tracks. It is rolled to one of the lifts, where giant inchworm-like zomboids begin hauling at ropes that carry the platform up the tower wall. A procession is approaching the train car. At the center is a creature unlike any Hitch has seen. It rests in a throne of bone, fused into a seamless mass that is carried by ornate tripods festooned with jutting bones, pendant-like flaps of skin, and dangling glass plates of various colors. The creature itself is a refined, arterial crimson in color, as if it were formed of magma. Its shape is roughly man-like, but it is much bulkier, a squat, powerful-looking thing with rough, stone-like planes and sharp edges. Two fierce, pinprick eyes glare from beneath a stony brow. The Golem. It is surrounded by caged heads of the living dead, borne on long, sloping poles, as was the speaking thing back at the Zomboid Cavern. Each head watches Hitch with unblinking, reptile absorption. The procession stops at the edge of the railcar. The heads are swung before Hitch's face. "You are the first of the new ones," the heads speak in unison. Their voices sound like a strangler victim's cry for help. The fist suddenly relaxes. Swarms of the pusher things are jumping onto the car to surround Hitch as he slides from the fist's grasp and snatches up the meat hook. "You will be the last," the heads declare as the pushers advance on Hitch. He raises the hook to smash at their glass eyes. "You know what they say about people who live in glass houses," Hitch mutters as he swings at the closest creature and crushes its skull. Just then, the locomotive explodes. Hitch sees the flash of light a hair-trigger second before the brunt of the explosion simply lifts him off the railcar and hurls him onto the burning desert floor. A wave of heat washes over the salt field, and Hitch watches in amazement as his leather jacket begins to smoke. Then he looks skyward. The railcar is spinning in a slow-motion somersault as it reaches the top of its arc and begins to fall. And Hitch at first does not register the fact that it is falling toward him. He struggles to his feet, then falls again as his leg goes out from under him. In the end, he scrambles on his hands and knees as the car plows into the ground bare feet behind him, kicking up a billowing, salty cloud of dust. Lesser chunks of blasted steel rain down around him, gouging craters out of the surface. Crippled zomboids drag themselves in limping circles through the chaos, and Hitch uses the meat hook to smash at any that stagger his way. A shadow sweeps over the land. Hitch turns and, through the clouds of smoke and dust, sees one of the mountainous creatures guarding the tower lumber to its feet. Each step it takes literally shakes the ground. As Hitch watches, fire splashes across its skull and torso in a sudden conflagration that spills down its sides and sweeps to the desert surface. A word jumps into Hitch's mind. Napalm. The thing glances skyward. It snatches at the air as a P-51 growls overhead, banking to port and scrambling for altitude as two of the flying creatures give chase, firing thorns in its wake. "The Colonel's men!" Hitch nearly shouts, a wiggle of elation squirming in his gut as he watches boxes of Mustangs and Lightnings sweep in over the desert, their guns blasting away at the zomboids, and twinkling Aluminum skin lozenges of napalm tumble into the blazing tower guard. The creature begins to totter as the fire eats into its skin and down into the cables of muscles that keep it upright. And then the thing teeters and slams into the ground, crushing legions of the walking eyes below. The ground jumps, and Hitch sees the tower begin to sway. Zomboids tumble from the platforms along its flanks. The golem materializes out of the fire and smoke and noise. He is striding purposefully, almost serenely, to the nearest platform. He climbs aboard, and the tenders haul the platform skyward in a frenzy. I must get that bomb, Hitch thinks. A row of bullets smack the ground in front of him and race toward the tower, pinging chunks from the glass. A Mustang roars overhead and then explodes into a flaming cloud of debris as a thorn shooter nails it with a missile. Hitch lurches to his feet and in the limping gait hobbles toward another nearby platform that is knocking and clanking beside the swaying tower. Suddenly, hands are on him. He lifts the meat hook to crush whatever has grabbed him. Hold your fire, dumbass. It's me, the colonel shouts. He thrusts his shoulder into Hitch's armpit and helps him toward the platform, grimacing all the while. Touching you makes me want to puke. How did your men find us? Hitch shouts as more explosions rock the tower base. Transponder, the colonel yells back. We all carry one. I took mine apart and tapped out a Morse code signal, telling them where to be and what to carry. I'll send you the bill. Hitch uses the meat hook to shatter the jeweled eye of a fist moving toward him. The thing begins to glow an incandescent red and tumbles away. But how did you get here? Hitch bellows as the fist explodes behind them. The colonel ducks and nearly falls. Didn't you ever ride the rails when you were a kid? He glances at Hitch with a smirking grin. I hid out after the tunnel thing chased us. When I saw the train arrive, I climbed into the undercarriage. Those zombies they were offloading almost got me. It scared the living hell out of me, I tell you. The bastards must have been hungry after their trip. They're always hungry, Hitch says. Help me onto that platform. They've taken the bomb to the top of the tower. Oh, sure, the colonel declares with pretended fussiness. And shall I haul your rotten ass to the tower top, sir? Because I don't think those things, and he nods at the tenders standing beside the ropes, are going to do it for you. You're not a member of the country club. I'll take care of them. You take care of doing what you're told. Yes, sir, the colonel shouts sarcastically as a bloom of napalm opens across the snake woman monstrosity, rousing her to an angry, writhing furor. Her tail whips across the salt flats in a spasmodic arc and smashes hundreds of scurrying zomboids into flinders of bone and muscle. They struggle onto the platform. The tenders stand away from the ropes and advance on them, their pincer jaws poised to grab and crush. Hitch hefts the meat hook and prepares to fight, but then a thought occurs to him. Black leather jackets and a cadre of zombies he called the Skeleton Crew, advancing on the electric fence surrounding Little Hitler's encampment in Texas, bearing their gifts of explosives. He'd exerted his will over those dead ones, and the tens of thousands of others he'd summoned by way of the empathetic resonance he'd been reborn with. He'd assumed the golem's hold on these creatures was complete, and he hadn't tried to use the mental leash to make them do what he wanted. But this might be a good time to find out. He concentrates on the tender nearest him and thinks, return to the rope. Haul the platform to the top of the tower. The thing wavers, and he repeats the command. He glances at the other thing and does likewise. If this is a staring match, I think you're losing, the colonel mutters. Be quiet. Hitch renews the order, and the tenders lower their jaws. He can feel no resistance from them. Rather, he senses they don't understand what he's trying to tell them. He forms a mental image of each tender hauling at his rope and concentrates on refining that image, filling in the gaps of feel and touch and muscle exertion. And suddenly, the tenders jerk themselves around and race back to the ropes and begin hauling. The platform wobbles into the air. Christ, you're a magician, the colonel shouts. The ground falls away as the platform bumps and jerks up the tower face. Below, Hitch can see a maelstrom of fire and smoke and unearthly monsters racing about as more bombs fall. Airplanes dive in and out of the greasy clouds, chased by the flying things, and thorns whistle into the sky in random firings. The snake thing is lying on its side like a torpedoed battleship, a huge blaze giving off a plume of oily black smoke that Hitch knows will be visible for miles. The colonel stares down in wonder, shaking his head. If I can imagine what hell looks like, it would look like this, he mutters. The platform shudders. Hitch realizes he let his attention wander, and the golem's influence over the rope tenders is creeping back. He wonders how the golem is able to muster the focus to manipulate each of the thousands of zomboids Hitch has seen, especially after his experience in Texas, where it took him days to assemble a similar number of walking dead using the most simple of imperatives, sent out to anyone or anything that might be listening. The Rosetta Stone, the voice says. Hitch glances at the tower face and sees a smoke-colored mist slithering up the wall, matching their pace of ascent. The colonel moans. Oh God, here we go again. When this thing shows up, trouble always follows. The voice laughs. Your friend hasn't died yet, it says to Hitch. It must be something in the water. It couldn't be that, the colonel shoots back. I haven't had any water. Hitch tries to maintain the image of the tenders hauling at their ropes, but all the questions that he has wanted the voice to answer come brimming to the forefront of his thoughts, giving new urgency by the approaching deadline, and his grip on the tenders is as shaky as their grip on the platform cables. Time is shorter than you think, the voice says with a note of gravity. The golem is about to seat the chalice. Once the Rosetta Stone is placed within the chalice, the golem will pour his life into the tower, and everything you and I have sought to accomplish will end. The message will be sent. I will cease to exist. And later, this world you have known will end. And worse for you, my dead friend, the voice adds as a dour footnote, I will be unable to keep my part of the deal. You screwed with me long enough, Hitch mutters. Tell me what this is all about. The mist curls in tendrils around the platform, like a cat folding in on itself to sleep before a fire. Are you ready to believe, my dead friend? The voice asks lightly. A Mustang roars by, spraying the tower with bullets. A zomboid whooshes past the platform as it plummets to the ground. You wouldn't have believed me before if I explained it to you the first time we spoke. You wouldn't have gone to this trouble, no matter what insights I promised for your services, had I told you these things. But now, after having seen everything you've seen, you may be ready to believe. The platform shakes as one of the tenders pauses. The colonel throws himself flat on the mat of fused bone and holds on. What are you? Hitch insists. The tender takes up the slack, and the platform rights itself. The mist settles into a dense fog that surrounds them, obscuring everything that is happening below. The sun shines through as a pale globe, slowly descending to the west. How do I explain it? The voice begins uncertainly. At the risk of sounding mystical, I would say the world is made of many layers that your kind cannot see or even understand. Some of you have an inkling that they are there. You're psychics and shamans and religious figures. But if I may use an analogy from your science of biology, their dabblings amount to insignificant proteins and nucleic acids in a sea that is infested with living things. I live in that sea, my friend, the voice says. I am, how would you put it, an evolutionary byproduct of a ferociously energetic event inflicted upon that sea of transcendental life, in much the way lightning and volcanism contributed to the formation of organic life on this planet. The Colonel whispers to Hitch. I think what he's trying to tell us is that he's bug-fuck crazy. The voice goes on. Not crazy, Colonel Black. Not crazy in your sense of the word. If you'll bear with me, the building blocks of my life were formed 65 million years ago, when the golem sent his last message. Hitch shakes his head. The golem is that old? He asks. The mist grows denser. Hitch can feel a gooey condensation forming on his exposed flesh. This planet has been struck by asteroids many times in its 4 billion year history, the voice says. Some of those strikes were coincidence. Some were not. Hitch pauses, his thoughts jumbling into confusion. A word comes to mind. Wormwood. The platform shudders again and tips on one end. He struggles to recompose the mental picture of the tenders hauling at the cables. Are you beginning to understand? The voice asks. Is it beginning to make sense to you? Hitch remembers a vague reference to the Gulf of Mexico having been created by an asteroid collision, one that would have destroyed many species of life. Yes, the voice hisses. Yes, you are. The golem was left here early in your planet's history by a race of people that, for reasons known only to them, had no interest in allowing the evolution of interlopers in the transcendental sea. At times in the past, when it seems that was about to happen, the golem will be roused from his sleep of the millennia to build a tower of glass upon which the Rosetta Stone would be placed. The Rosetta Stone is a kind of psychic capacitor. The golem will then activate the stone with his essence, transmitting a signal to one of the many thousands of asteroids circling your solar system. Asteroids that have been equipped with the physical means to alter their orbits so that they collide with Earth, destroying whatever thinking life has evolved over the intervening years. It is a self-perpetuating process. The prophecy Heavy G spoke of. And what awakens the golem? Hitch asks. The voice hesitates. Then it says, I do. The colonel blurts, That's mighty neighborly of you. No malice intended, I assure you, the voice adds quickly. As I said, the building blocks of my life were created from the dispersed remnants of my predecessor during the last transmission, which occurred some 65 million years ago. For those building blocks to become organized into an awareness, such as myself, requires the existence of a localized disturbance in the transcendental sea. You mean people? Hitch cuts in. He feels a tremor and wonders if the tower is shaking, or if the jolt originated from within his body. I mean thought, my dead friend. This time, it is human beings who are the originators of thought. 200 million years ago, it might have been reptiles. And before that, who knows? But it is the presence of thought that brings me into existence. And the golem is filled up by my... How do I put it? My existence, the voice whispers. So my existence alone is sufficient to replace the golem's essence, emptied by his last transmission. Once he is restored, his purpose is simple. Recover the Rosetta Stone. Direct an army of zomboids to build a tower of glass. Send the message. The transmission itself destroys awareness like myself in the local area, but my constituents remain, awaiting the next sentient species to give me life. And bring the golem down upon them, Hitch finishes. Yes, the voice says, the mist whispering about the platform. And that is why you must destroy the golem and the tower before his message is sent. You will save your world and mine. I do not know what my predecessors felt about the notion of awareness, but I treasure mine, and I don't want it to end. By communicating with your scientists and political leaders over the centuries, I hope to forewarn human beings of the golem's threat, thus preserving my awareness. That, by the way, is what I hope to offer you, my dead friend. The voice speaks to Hitch. That appreciation of awareness, a sense of purpose that transcends mere ambitions or experience. It is the feel of life. It is a reason to be. Hitch's thoughts slip a moment, and he sees a memory of himself as a boy, with his best friend, Michael Dunn, lying in his backyard on a moonless night, the damp grass glued to the back of their forearms and legs as they lie on the ground, watching the stars and wondering what was out there, and feeling a twinge of sadness. Yes, but with the knowledge that they would never find the answer to that question. Now the voice was offering to answer a similar mystery, and whether he believed the voice's story or not had nothing to do with anything. An asteroid crashing into the Earth would not alter his existence, and he had no great allegiance to the idea of saving the voice's awareness. But if the voice could give him the ability to feel his experiences, rather than simply recording them, a treasure beyond price was his for the taking. Was that desire? The platform wrenches sideways, and one end slips. The tender is letting the cable slide through its grip. Hitch grabs the platform edge and holds on, as the right side of the platform suddenly drops from under them, hurling the tender into empty air. The colonel tumbles past, and Hitch snatches him by his shirt collar and hauls him close. The colonel grabs him in a bear hug and whispers in a jittery, terror-filled voice, "This is not how I want to die," and he scrunches his eyes shut. Hitch focuses all his energies into forcing the remaining tender to haul on the rope. They start to rise in jerking fits and starts. You are almost on the top of the tower, but time is ever shorter, the voice says, a blur of sound. The mist is beginning to clear. The golem is preparing to send his message, and something else is trying to stop you from reaching him. The remaining shreds of mist blow away, opening the view to the ground. Hitch glances down through the smoke. An airplane flashes by, its wing guns twinkling. The pilot is shooting at something that is scaling the tower. A pincer slices through the roiling smoke, and then another. Gargantuan pincers. And then a pair of eyes, hard and unblinking in their irresoluteness, stare out at the billowing clouds. The tower trembles again. I will not die again. Hitch slings the colonel over the lip of the platform where the cable support structure is mounted, then hauls himself over the side. He releases his hold on the tender, and the platform falls away, the cable singing through the pulley as it plunges to the ground thousands of feet below. Hitch pauses and gazes across the platform. It is made of bone, fused into a ribbed, flat mass, with braces that go deep into the body of the tower. Dangling from poles are caged skulls, hanging like oriental lanterns all across the platform. A flight of crystal stairs leads to a dais, upon which another small platform of bone has been built. There, the chalice has been positioned. Creatures with slender, bony fingers are gathered at the base of the chalice, performing some kind of delicate task. Standing off to the side is the golem. He is holding a large sphere, the size of a beach ball, that pulses sluggishly, emitting a ruddy light, as if it were the heart of some hibernating beast. The nuclear device lies at the base of the stairway, cast aside. "Where do we go from here?" the colonel whispers. "I don't think your pal's gonna roll out the welcome wagon." A trembling vibration runs through the tower. In his mind's eye, Hitch sees the gigantic zomboid clambering closer. We get the bomb and figure out some way to reach the ground. There we set it to detonate. "And then what?" the colonel spits, his face screwed into a frown. "Call a taxi? Anybody within 20 miles of that sucker is going to look like toast." He shakes his head wearily, and Hitch notices the purple blotches on his face and arms. "Look, I don't think you've thought this thing through. You got a monster the size of Manhattan chasing us up the tower. We got this golem thing here about to do what your spook friend told us not to let him do. And I've got a griping stomachache. I don't know how you feel about things, but to me, this is looking like a one-way ticket." Hitch stares at the colonel. "I say we blow the lid off this sucker now," he declares, sucking in a sharp breath and clutching his belly. "It probably doesn't matter to you because you're already dead. But I've got friends out there, people I care about, and I die a happy man knowing that they had some kind of future." It should matter, Hitch thinks. To a man who could feel, it would matter, as it does with this man, who knows he will die, and continues to struggle so that others might live. It matters to him. And if I am to feel, if I am to care, it will have to matter with me. Hitch unzips his jacket and rips out a swatch of the lining. Using the tip of the meat hook, he scratches numbers and letters into the fabric. He gives it to the colonel. "This is the access code and arming sequence for the bomb. The rest is self-explanatory. Set it to detonate 30 minutes from now. After that, I don't know. I'll come up with something," he says. He starts to stand and hesitates, staring into the colonel's tired eyes. "Good luck." Then he sprints for the dais. The caged heads begin to caw, and the zomboids on the dais whirl defensively. Hitch takes the steps 2 at a time and plunges into the crowd, knocking down bodies as if they were bowling pins. One of the feathery acolytes splinters into pieces as he smashes at the thing with his fist. The golem tromps toward around the edge of the framework, bearing the chalice. Hitch snatches up the Rosetta Stone and holds it above his head. Everything on the platform stops. The golem freezes. Hitch casts a furtive glance over his shoulder and sees the colonel hovering over the access plate of the nuclear device, poking at the keyboard. "You are the first of the new ones," the heads screech, swinging from their cages of bone. "You will be the last." "And you are the last of the fuckers," Hitch whispers. "Have a nice day." He hurls the stone to the dais floor. It explodes like a bomb, sending glass fragments blasting across the platform like slivers of blood-tipped ice. The golem stands unmoving. He gazes down at the jagged pieces spread across the platform, and Hitch can read no emotion in his craggy features. No spiral of rage he might have expected of a human whose plans had been laid to waste. The fragments begin to move. They shake at first, tinkling delicately against the glass brick floor. Then they skitter over the smooth surface and join with one another. At the moment of contact, they fuse to a larger, solid mass. A sliver knifes through Hitch's boot and zings like a dart into the growing sphere. Others are sliding from all corners of the platform, as if drawn by invisible lines of magnetism to rejoin the main body. When the floor has been swept clean of shards, the Rosetta Stone lies perfectly recomposed at the golem's foot. He places it back in the chalice and turns to Hitch. "You are the last of the new ones," the caged heads snarl, and the golem leaps. He slams into Hitch, and the force knocks Hitch across the platform and into the glass lip of a wall that surrounds the dais. For a moment, everything blanks out as Hitch struggles to get up. The golem stomps around the platform and descends on Hitch again, aiming a boulder-like fist at his skull. Hitch dodges, and the fist punches through the glass behind him with a crash, blowing out a scintillating cloud of slivers. Hitch slides to the side and swings the meat hook like a club. It whangs against the golem's skull, and the shock of concussion nearly snaps Hitch's arm from the socket. He staggers back and weighs the idea of looping the meat hook chain around the golem's feet and tripping him. That might allow him to drag the golem to the edge of the tower and push him over the side. But before he can swing, the golem lunges again and hammers him with a bone-shattering blow that sends him tumbling down the stairs. He rolls to a stop. Splinters of ribs protrude from the chest of his jacket. Skewered on one of the bones is the corpse of a scorpion. The colonel shouts over to him, "The timer's shot. I can't set the detonator. We've got to do it manually." The golem is plodding down the stairs, his arms swinging like battle axes. Hitch tries to get to his feet, but his leg flips out from under him, the femur jutting from his chaps. He drags himself across the glass surface, away from the golem. He comes up against the edge of the tower. The colonel is staring at him, goggle-eyed, as the golem stops and raises a blocky foot to kick him over the edge. "Push the button!" Hitch screams. And then a thicket of bullets races across the surface and chews into the golem, knocking him backwards as a helicopter gunship rises above the edge of the tower, its rotors chopping at the air. A crewman hunched over a Gatling gun at the midship hatch sends another stream of bullets tearing into the golem, and the impact bowls him over. The chopper hovers over the colonel. He waves up to them, and they drop him something. A radio. And it begins screaming into the mouthpiece. The chopper suddenly banks and darts away. Hitch sees the colonel staring with an expression of horror at something behind him. A gargantuan pincer reaches over the side of the tower. Then another. The golem stands and casually mounts the stairway to the dais as a giant claw snaps across the glass. Then a pair of massive, jaundiced eyes rise above the tower edge. Hitch scrambles away as the pincers seek and probe across the breadth of the tower platform. He almost reaches the colonel when one of the claws thuds against him and springs shut around his chest. It snatches him up and holds him aloft, above the top of the tower, and the desert spreads out before Hitch in a swaying, acrophobic panorama of baking salt flats, and dead dry hills, and milky, sun-scorched sky. Something falls out of the air to Hitch's left. One of the flying creatures is arrowing toward the ground, the glowing eye in his forehead now a dull black color. Other flying monstrosities begin to tumble in crazed looping circles and whirling flat spins. On the ground, Hitch sees zomboids collapsing into the sand. The golem is releasing his servants. But the jeweled eye in the tentacle monster's skull continues to blaze. Hitch sends a tentative feeler of control snaking toward the thing, and recoils from the furnace blast of mental heat radiating from the thing. He hears cawing and hooting. The caged heads below are screaming at him, and when he looks, they cry out shrilly, Watch, new one, as your circle comes to a close. The golem leans over the chalice bearing the Rosetta Stone. The stone begins to throb more rapidly, as if the golem's presence has brought to life something within the stone, and a similar resonance begins to pound within the golem's pinprick eyes. A searing incandescence rises in the golem's body, and as Hitch watches, a tittering thrill of amazement edging through him, a bright fluid, like molten steel, cascades from the golem's eye sockets and into the chalice, pouring his life into the stone. The tower shudders. The Rosetta Stone bursts into unmodulated brilliance, and arteries of blinding light begin to flow down through the tower, giving it the appearance of a living thing, tunneled with incandescent blood vessels. The desert itself seems to moan, and Hitch sees a funnel cloud of glittering motes. The voice suck itself into the jeweled eye of the scorpion behemoth. Suddenly, the monster raises a gigantic arm, and in a sweeping blow knocks the golem away from the chalice. Bright fluid sprays across the platform as the golem careens into the glass wall and lies there stupidly, his eyes bleeding pure white light. The thing gently lowers Hitch to the platform surface. In a whispery, sandpapery tone, the voice says, "Hurry! Do what you must to arrange detonation of the device before the golem regains control of this." And then the creature goes rigid as the golem struggles to his feet and pounds up the dais. Hitch can feel the terawatts of psychic energy blazing across the platform as the golem and the voice battle to possess the monolithic creature. Its claws waggle, and the movement slowly increases as the golem advances up the crystal stairway, one riser at a time. The helicopter roars overhead. An optic orange harness pendulums beneath it. Hitch scrambles to the colonel. He's leaning against the nuclear device. The digital readout on the control panel flashes 000. "Go with your friends," Hitch shouts. "Take shelter in the cavern. I'll give you as much time as I can." But the colonel is shaking his head. "I've already told the boys I'm not leaving. That harness is for you." He coughs, spewing bloody flecks across the bomb casing. "Your spook friend was right. I'm one dead old geezer. And don't take this personally," he chuckles weakly, "but I wouldn't make a very good zombie." He sighs and lays his head against the glass wall. "So I think I'll just stay here a while, just for the hell of it." Hitch stares at the man. He can remember a time when he might have given himself over to the idea of death, but those days seem dimly distant now, and he cannot quite recall the resignation of death, the love that lay behind altruism, and the courage of selflessness. All the same, he feels something moving inside him, a twisting of sadness, or a growing warmth of respect. He cannot say. He stands. The colonel is curled next to the bomb like a child nuzzling his mother. Like the woman Dakota, he is human, so much more than the twisted, selfish acolytes of Nails. Hitch says, "I wish you a good death." And then he snatches the harness. The chopper rises, and Hitch goes spinning away into the scalding desert sky. They sit down at the mouth of the cavern, Hitch landing first and scuttling aside as the chopper settles amid a whirling, gritty cloud of sand. The chopper crew leaps outside and sprints for the cavern mouth. Hitch lingers. From here, the tower resembles a thin, glowing wand aimed at the stars, and he wonders how he and the colonel had missed it those many hours ago as they drove to the cavern. He thinks he can see a tiny knob at the tower's pinnacle. Is that the scorpion thing, or merely a trick of perspective, skewed by distance? And what has happened to the voice? The tower pulses once, searing the land with a light so bright it reverses the order of shadow and illumination. A thin beam of ruby-colored light lances into space. The message, Hitch thinks, and stands there, gazing up at it. Too late. Everything is lost. Then the horizon is erased in a purplish flash that swallows it all. The land, the air, and everything else, in a convolution of force as arbitrary and pure as death itself. What now? What now? What now? Days later, Hitch finds a path out of the valley. He drives to the airbase in Nevada and tells the men about their friends at the cavern. He tells them to look for the helicopter that was destroyed in the nuclear shockwave. He does that for the colonel. And then he locates a pipe-fitting shop in Tonopah and repairs his shattered bones, just as he'd fixed the Harley all those months ago, with metal rods and welding braces. He could walk again. So he drives. And stops at the town of DeNoia on the Oregon border, where he refills the gas tank and pushes the Harley to the side of a restaurant parking lot and stares at the horizon, thinking about many things. Lost. Everything. Gone. The voice, the promise of some insight that might give him reason to climb aboard the Harley and ride to the next town, somewhere, anywhere. The world itself, lost. He sits there a long time, feeling nothing, not even the whiff of doom that, oddly, might have given him hope. And finally, he hangs his head, a reflex from his days as a living person, when defeat left him nothing but to stare at the ground. Written in the dirt at his feet are the words, "Not lost." He does not jump back or suck in a startled breath. He only asks the ground, "Is it you?" Words form there. Yes, damaged, but still here. How? Hitch whispers. Message incomplete, the voice writes. Hitch squats, his metal joint emitting a rusty screech. Does that mean the asteroid? A single word forms. Unknown. Then, may not. Unknown. Hitch says nothing for a moment. The possibility that their efforts to destroy the golem had not been wasted gives him a sense of satisfaction. But he wants to ask the voice another question, the one he's carried with him throughout the ordeal. But he feels he already knows the answer. What about our deal? The dirt remains undisturbed almost a full minute before grudging letters appear. Damaged. 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 Hitch stands. Then it is over. He might as well leave, or stay, or do nothing. It is over. The voice cannot help him now. But a new message appears. Everything is cyclical. And finally, you are the first of the new ones. A faint breath of air begins to move the dirt, filling in the subtle scratchings. In moments, the words are gone. Hitch stands beside the parking lot a few minutes longer. The sun is low in the western sky, and the quiet has fallen over the countryside. He seems to remember liking this part of the day. He wonders, if he stares long enough, will that feeling return? Not today, but maybe tomorrow. He would see. He climbs aboard the Harley and fires up the V-twin, and he drives away. The end. The end of Dead Heat by Del Stone, Jr. Read by Joe DeNoia, Chesterfield, New Jersey, February 20th, 2026.